Good evening, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining me again on another wonderful, wonderful Hump Day Wednesday. I'm your host of Paranormal Brew, Taryn Kerber. Thank you all for joining me. Hello, Yvette. Hello, lady. You are an amazing, amazing person. Love you. Love all the hard work you do. So this evening, I have a very interesting, awesome guest, Dennis Stone, owner, operator, CEO of a place that is called America's Stonehenge. Been in his family. He was telling me briefly backstage, over 70 years. I'm going to let him tell all that cool details because, and I want to say that it's probably going to be a very detailed show. So if you have questions, I will star them and I will put them up towards the end of the conversation, unless I can sneak them in while we're talking. But this should be interesting. There's a lot of mysterious and paranormal and all kinds of fun stuff that we love surrounding this America's Stonehenge. So I'm going to be quiet and I'm just going to bring on our guest for this evening, Mr. Dennis Stone. Hello.
So good evening. Thank you for having me on this evening.
Thank you for coming on. I'm excited. This is something different and something that I've never had anybody else come on and talk about these unique properties that seem to be everywhere. Before we came on here, I was telling you that there's a similar place that, from looking at the pictures you shared with me. There's a similar place in Pennsylvania called Columnsill, where they have just these stone structures all over the property. And it's got this like awesome lore to it, this mystic lore to it. And the history and all the things that you guys are finding with your property is amazing. It's almost like it's a hotbed for paranormal and a hotbed for all this fun stuff that we love to investigate. So I'm going to be quiet. I want you to just, tell us like, the backstory and, you were telling me a little bit, but I want you to share with everybody, how your dad and then you and we'll go from there. And I do have questions. So we'll get to the questions and everything, but let's start at the beginning.
Well, again, thank you for having me on this evening. It's a pleasure talking to you. And yeah, this site is very unusual. It is a magnet for people that have, interest in many different areas, the whole spectrum of interest, basically. But my dad first heard about this on a radio show, just like we're doing right now, back on a Friday night in the summer of 1955. My dad, basically, to give you a background, he was in the Coast Guard for a few years up in Canada for the U.S. Coast Guard, working LORAN, long-range navigation. And he was very, very close to where the site that the Vikings were discovered in 1960 and confirmed in 1964, the Lonzo Meadow site, which we visited about 2 years ago for the first time. But he was based up there in the early 50s before they actually discovered that, unfortunately, because he had a deep interest in history and the unusual Native American history and all of that. He would have taken his time to go across the bay there right into Newfoundland and check the site out if he had known about it at the time. After he left the Coast Guard, he worked at AT&T Bell Labs as an engineer, and he stayed there for 30 years. But on this Friday night, In the summer of 1955, I'm going to date myself, but I was about 18 months old. It was a show on the biggest radio station in New England. In fact, it's still one of the biggest in New England. It's a TV and radio station now, and they've been going for like 85 years. The name of the show is Yankee Yarns, and the talk show host is Alton Hall Blackington. He was a native of Maine, but I guess he drove down to Massachusetts to Boston, where the studios are near Boston, and he was on it every Friday night about tales of New England, all these strange tales and cool things, and unusual places. And on that Friday night, my dad just happened to tune it in. He's 8 miles from what we call America's Stonehenge today, only 8 miles away where he lived in the town of Derry, New Hampshire. And again, never heard of the place, listening to the show, and he got totally blown away by the show. These strange stone ruins, nobody knows who built them. Are they ancient, maybe Viking, maybe, Irish colony monks, or all these different theories, legends, and Native Americans came up because they had built it, that kind of thing. And that show actually aired again later that summer. It was a different show, but about the same place. It's another episode they did. And so a couple of days later, he's at a barber shop waiting to have his hair done in the same town. And the gentleman's name is Warren Haywood. He was the owner of the barber shop, and he's doing somebody else's hair. My dad's picked up a magazine, started to read it, and it was about the same site. There were pictures this time. So he got a view of what the place looks like, which really, wow, this is cool, And he asked the barber, he says, hey, can I keep this? And or take it home with me just to look at it. And the barber goes, well, how old is that? He goes, well, it's 1952. So it's a 3-year-old magazine called New Hampshire Profile. It's kind of like New England, we have Yankee magazine. And that's published in New Hampshire too, but this is called New Hampshire Profile magazine. And it went for many decades. It's not around any longer, unfortunately, but it was a whole feature article about the same site. What a coincidence within a couple of days of each other. Yeah. That weekend, and my dad took it with him with the blessing of the barber. And at a family get-together at my aunt and uncle's in that same town, about 10 people on a Saturday night playing coffee. Back in those days, they did a little smoking of cigarettes, of course, and a lot of beer. And it was pretty much a custom every Saturday night for a whole bunch of people to get together and just enjoy talking and playing cards. And that. My dad passed that around to everybody, and nobody knew what it was either. They're looking at it going, well, I never heard of this place. So I got to my aunt and uncle, my mom's sister and her husband, and they go, oh, well, we were there in the 1930s. We used to picnic up there. We rode our bicycles about 7 or 8 miles down the road, and we went up on this hill with all these stone ruins, and we sat among the stones and everything having our picnic lunch. Because my dad was kind of like, you did? And they had never mentioned it before, so he goes, hey, can you find the place? So that Sunday, because they said, we don't know, it's been 2 decades. That Sunday morning, they left me with my grandma and my first cousin with grandma. And they went riding around North Salem, New Hampshire, trying to find this place. And it was not open to the public, no road signs, no social media, no Google Maps. And so they drove around for a little while till they found this old, basically dirt road that went into the woods. And my aunt and uncle said, I think this is it. So they parked the car in the road, walked up about a half a mile up the hill, and there was the site. So my dad climbed under the fence, basically trespassing. It was locked, a big chain link fence put up in 1937 by the very first investigator. It's still there today, almost 90 years later. It's in perfect shape too. My dad snuck under it, went among the ruins. The other stayed outside. And there was so much brush in the site at that time, you couldn't really see my dad for the most part walking around in there. When he finally came back out, they were like probably getting like, where is he? He came out and he goes, oh, this place is just simply all the chambers and standing stones and all the different features of the site. And this big table and everything. He goes, what the heck is this place? And he was blown away. And then he goes something about maybe I could do research. Maybe we could open it as a museum to the public or an attraction. And my mom's, response was, you got rocks in your head. Because I was a baby. My sister was on her way. And she came a few months later. In 56, she came actually. And they had actually built our home with our relatives. They actually hand built our house, and it's still there in Derry, New Hampshire today, So, they had a lot going on in mind. And my dad was not only an engineer, but he was going to Merrimack College at the time too. So he had his plate full, I guess, and my mom had her plate full. But they spent the next 3 years meeting the owner of the property. And by 1958, we had a visitor center, parking lot, driveway, well, and all of that put in. And they opened it up in June on a soft opening, late June and I have it in my book actually, the date that they did the soft opening. The hard opening, I believe, is July 11th, and the governor showed up for that. So it opened up as the Stone Ruins of New Hampshire, which is a subtitle of my new book that came out almost a year ago. But the next year they changed it to Mystery Hill Caves, which some people may, remember hearing that word, Mystery Hill Caves. And so we've been going for 67 years now, open to the public. I'm like the second generation. My son, Kelsey, we have only one son. He's an engineer like my dad. He works at Raytheon on the Patriot and everything. And he's been an engineer for a couple other engineering firms, but he stays involved with the site also. In fact, he's going to be writing the forward in the introduction in my next book. He's already done that, but he does a lot of hands-on things when he's not at Raytheon. And we have a granddaughter. She's 4. She's over there quite a bit too. She's like the fourth learner. She has her own little office upstairs and everything. We have her in kindergarten and everything, in preschool or whatever. But she's over there when she can. She has a little desk and everything. And so it's kind of nice to see it's still a family business. And, hopefully it will stay like that. But again, we are a state historic site from New Hampshire since 1971. So we get a plaque on the highway, basically,
That's
and some
awesome.
recognition. Yeah, it's kind of neat that we get that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So
so that's basically the background of the
so
family.
your dad meets the owner, right? Um, and then how does the transition go from him to your dad though? Like, I mean, did your dad I love that there was something pulling your dad to this place. There was something, it wasn't paranormal. What was it? He just wanted to preserve the land?
Basically, it was his last name. His name is Stone. Our last name is Stone. So I don't know. Maybe it's preordained. It had to be.
Yeah.
But he did have an interest in history. So that was the other thing that was good. He loved that kind of thing. And but the radio show, the magazine, and then my aunt and uncle having been there, all of those things came together within the course of just several days. Maybe a week and a half or whatever it was. And so yeah, it's been. And I grew up with it. I didn't know any different. I did work there in '68, putting on bumper stickers. In '70, I became a guide, and through the '70s, I was in high school. Then I started flying lessons and ground school for flying, and then I decided to go to college a couple of years out of high school because I realized if you want to be an airline pilot, you need to get, at that time they required, college degree, back in the '70s. Today, they kind of waived some of that because they're short of pilots, but I went into the flying business for 42 years, but on my days off, I always worked at this place. But yeah, back to my dad. It was a gentleman named Malcolm Pearson. He's an interesting guy. He died in 2011 at 100 years old. About
Oh, wow.
100 years ago, yeah, it was 100 years ago next year that his family bought a place in Upton, Massachusetts, and he was 17. And this farm, a very small farm, and when he bought it from the gentleman, when they were turning the keys over and everything, and they're getting ready to move into the house, and the gentleman was, saying to the young Malcolm, basically, hey, there's a cellar or a root cellar out back. Have you seen it? Because none of the family had seen it. And when Malcolm went out back and saw this underground chamber, it's amazing. It looks like a igloo shape. In Europe, they're called passage graves with a long, tiny passage. This one's 14 feet long. You have to duck and you have to crawl, kind of almost crawl through it. And you get into this chamber that's about 10 feet or 11 feet tall by about the same wide, and it's shaped like an igloo, kind of the beehive shape inside, all
Yeah.
stone. And the family actually owned that until 1970. And so that whet Malcolm's, he was a young man, it whet his interest, and he stayed involved with it from 17 up to about 100 years old. And he's the gentleman that my dad ended up working with to first lease the property. So from '58, we have all the paperwork. I've been going through a lot of it because we scanned all his records going back. Some of the records go back before even Malcolm, back over 100 years. And all this is electronically saved in a cloud now in case we should lose the building or something. But I've been going through all the actual paperwork, and there's all the letters and all the documents from the state of New Hampshire and with Malcolm Pearson, all the lawyers' letters. So they leased it from '58, basically, until 1965. And at that point, my dad raised enough capital to buy out the 20 acres, which contains most of the main site and astronomical alignments. But around that time, my dad had already purchased with a visitor center set, and he purchased some other land around it. And the risk was Malcolm could have sold it and almost did sell it to somebody else, even when we were open for business. So it was like a 3-year lease, and somebody else almost came along and actually was trying to buy the site from under my, around my dad kind of. And my dad would end up with a really nice, well, not a real nice, but a visitor center with nothing to see. That could have been, that was kind of risky. And that was for like 7 years,
Yeah.
until he obtained the main site. And at that time, my dad slowly, and we weren't wealthy, but he had to go get loans and everything and all of that. And he bought up today almost 110 acres of the entire hill plus part of another hill just to preserve everything. And if we had,
Love that.
you might be looking at a summer solstice sunrise or sunset with a house sitting by the stone, or maybe the stone wouldn't be there anymore. It would be, standing monolith. And so it was really good that they did that. My dad, the family, and even other researchers and everything were really behind that, trying to preserve the hill. So all of them, it was a really good thing they did that. Because in '63, Route 93 came out of Boston into New Hampshire. We became the bedroom state for Massachusetts. The town I grew up in, Derry, went from like 6,000. Today it's in the mid 30s, I think, But New
Right.
Hampshire was going like crazy in the '60s, and it still is to some degree, but it could be where they'd be homes sitting on top of this today, and that has happened at some of the other sites in the Northeast. Unfortunately, they're gone today. So Malcolm, yeah, here's quite a guy. And that chamber today, the Upton Chamber, is part of the Upton, Massachusetts Historical Site, or what do they call it? Heritage. It's called the Heritage Pot in Upton, and you can visit that. It's one of 800 different places in the Northeast with structures. And I know you mentioned down in, I think, Bucks County. That's just another site. It could be several sites there. Our site is one site, but it can be one chamber, like Windham, New Hampshire has a chamber. It's only like 6 miles from here. And that's where, if you're into UFOs, David Fravor from the Tic Tac UFO, that's
Hmm.
where he lives, right over there. I hope to meet him someday. He was on the Nimitz back in 2004, and they have it's on the TV quite a bit, where they
Yeah.
were flying the F-18 Super Hornet. Anyway, he just lives down the street, and I'd like to meet him because I flew for 42 years. I didn't get in the military; my eyes were not good enough. But it's always fun talking to another pilot, and his
Yeah.
UFO thing would be really cool. But that chamber's right there, and that's one site. There's a town in North Stonington, Connecticut, and that town is amazing. And we found this out 9 years ago when a book came out called Ceremonial Stonework, all about North Stonington, Connecticut. There's over 8,000 of these structures on 35,000 acres of land. And what you see at our site, you'll see it scattered all over North Stonington. And the other big area we know of is the Hudson Valley. And a lot of these structures have been on like History Channel because of the UFO flap back in 1982, 83. There was a big UFO event that took place, and they still talk about that. One of my colleagues flying for an airline at that time, he actually was interviewed by Time and Newsweek because of what he saw. I used to fly in a LaGuardia all the time, actually starting in the '70s. I worked doing mail before I got on with the airlines. It was a mail plane. So I didn't see it myself, but that area is loaded. Westchester, Putnam County, Orange County, and Dutchess County loaded with about 500 different structures right up and down the Hudson, right north of New York City, that close to the city. So these things are everywhere, including Pennsylvania, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, it's interesting that I didn't realize that. Now I only know of Comstock. Now I know of America's Stonehenge, right? Like, but I didn't realize there was that many structures all over. Let's talk about the history of what you found so far, of the history of these stones and structures, and because it goes back pretty far.
Yeah, right. It does. Yeah, that's one of the questions is how old is the site, And we started carbon dating back in 1967, and we did another carbon dating last year. So, we're talking, almost 60 years worth of carbon dating. And the oldest carbon dating, I should say, on the site. And I mentioned a chain link fence before. That was put up by the original archaeologist, William B. Goodwin of Hartford, Connecticut.
Yeah.
He was an antiquarian. He was an insurance millionaire. He was the first cousin of J.P. Morgan, as a matter of fact. But Goodwin lived all over the country, and when he was in Ohio for 15 years working for insurance, he had already been in Seattle, and he had been in San Francisco, and he moved out of there just when the earthquake happened in San Francisco. I'm sure he felt himself quite lucky not to be involved with all that insurance mess. But in Ohio, he went out on his weekends marking some of at one time, Ohio had about 10,000 ancient mounds. I mean, pyramidal mounds, effigy mounds, geometric mounds, and some of them are still there. About 10% are still there. When he was there 100 and something years ago, 120, 30 years ago, 15 years, he would actually go on weekends and go out and map. And there were more of the mounds back then. So that's part of his interest in the past, But he bought the site in 1937 after seeing this site and got involved with it. And so he was the first archaeologist, and we started, like I say, dating using radiocarbon dating, 1967, and he put up that chain link fence that covers 1 acre of the main site. It was a 6 foot fence with barbed wire on top. It was put that in that manner to keep people from trespassing, which my dad snuck under it, but also stealing artifacts. And he put that up there for that reason. He still lived in Hartford, Connecticut. And during the war, they had like gas stamps, so he didn't make his way up there. It was kind of hard for him to get up there, but he hired Malcolm to kind of keep an eye because Malcolm was a little bit closer in time. And then Malcolm had a guy locally in North Salem that actually kept an eye on it. Harry Appison, actually. Harry Appison was the guy that kind of kept an eye. He had a key for the gates to get in at the main site. So in the main site, that's where most of the chambers, but not all locally. And that inside, the oldest date we have right now with carbon dating is 4,000 years old. That was obtained in 1971.
Wow.
And it was next to a chamber called the Chamber in Ruins with a huge roof slab that's collapsed into it. That chamber's had a lot of different features. 3 inscriptions were found there back in 69 and 67, 3 different inscriptions, which were identified later as Phoenician, Libyan, and one other one just adjacent to it is called Celtic or Celtic Ogham or Ogham. But the 3 carbon datings on the north wall, opposite where the inscriptions were found, which were on the south side near the entrance, the dates were a piece of pine root from a pine tree that Goodwin saw back in the 30s. The stump was there. He photographed it. Actually, Malcolm, the gentleman I mentioned, became almost like a professional photographer. He photographed everything, and we have all those photographs today at this site. And they knew of about 15 sites back in the 30s compared to the 800 we have today. It's not too many. But we have all of that, and then Goodwin wrote 4 different books where a lot of the photographs end up too. We have 2 of his 4 books actually. So the stump was there, and they estimated the age of the stump 1690s. It was a big white pine. It was rotted. They couldn't do dendrochronology. It was too rotted to get the little tree rings. You couldn't see them, it's so rotted. But it was right next to the north wall of the Chamber of Ruins. And by 67, they did all the excavations. We have all the photographs, and they were digging down, and they actually photographed the root growing into the north wall, and that dated to 1690. So they were pretty close to being over 300 years old, So you don't build a structure around the tree. The tree roots grow through the structure. Because one of the arguments by mainstream archaeologists is, some crazy farmer in the 1800s built the site. They're pretty adamant about that, and you'll hear a few of those today, even with all the 16 carbon datings and some other dating method it's called OSL. We've been doing that more recently. So that proved that the site was there before even the colonial period in this area. It's before the Europeans came over. So it wasn't built by some crazy farmer. It was already sitting there. 1969, they dug, and they went down adjacent to where the stump was. They went down, and they hit sterile soil for a while. They didn't hit anything. It was very disappointing. It's a very slow process doing excavating with trowels and toothbrushes and photographing. But they started hitting charcoal, which is fantastic, and you can carbon date that. Then they started hitting flakes of stone, and that doesn't sound that exciting, but the flakes of stone are from when people are actually shaping big stones. It's napping like on an arrowhead or big slabs. They were actually being shaped or dressed using percussion flaking. It's a Stone Age technology, the shape. So some of these flakes were there, and then they started finding hammer stones, rubbing stones, stone scrapers, stone picks in this mix. And those are Stone Age tools, not historic farmers' tools,
Right.
And then they were able to date the charcoal to 3,000 years old in 1969, and 71 they dated. Adjacent to that, they went down further. They found more of the tools, and they found more of the charcoal that dated to 4,000 years. But below all of that, the bedrock had been removed by the original builders. That's below all of this. So the bedrock pouring had to take place first by the builders, and then they built the structure, and then all the stuff came in afterwards. So we have kind of a minimum date there of about 4,000 years. Go fast forward until 1973. We had been working on the astronomical alignment since 1965. We cleared out the First Avenue. But we realized by 73, we have to have a surveyor come in, pay a professional surveyor come in and start surveying all the alignments and all the walls professionally, into a high degree of accuracy. So we hired Beverly Pearson and Associates of Derry, New Hampshire. And his son, Charlie, he's just retiring recently from doing this work, but he was the guy that came up with his team. And because we had to pay as he went we were on a kind of a tight budget always at this museum, it took 5 years for him to survey about 16 acres of the astronomical alignments. He wasn't doing it every week, or if he'd come and do some, he would go back and crunch all the numbers, all the data, give it to us, and then he might come back months later and do another section. And again, we didn't have GoFundMe back then, So he had to raise money different ways. And by 1977, he had completed 16 of the 110 acres, and that's where the alignments are. We sent that data to the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. They were located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And they reviewed that data over the winter. And we have the name of the gentleman that did the review on that. And basically what they said, if these were used for astronomical purposes, they would work about 1800 BC, plus or minus about 200 years. And that carbon dating, I mentioned that was 4,000 years old. I rounded it up. It was actually came back at 1800 BC, plus or minus 250 years on the carbon dating. And that was a 7-year time period between both, but they both kind of astronomically and radiocarbon dating seem to indicate that the site was built about 4,000 years ago, which was very exciting news to us.
Yeah.
That's kind of like not an opinion; it's kind of like scientific.
Right. Like now you're getting validation
Yeah,
of this,
it's one thing supports the other, kind of thing.
Yeah. So,
So that's kind of giving the main site. But we have a 7,400-year-old date too that was taken about 30 years ago out near the North Stone, over that stone is where Polaris is today. But due to the Earth's precession, a little different movement than the one that dated it to 1800 B. That's called the Bligety. It's the Bligety cycle. It's a 41,000-year cycle where the Earth's tilt back and forth. 22 degrees, 40 minutes, I think, to 24 degrees, 20 minutes, I believe it is. It's about 1 minute every century. And that can tell you when the site was built. So any site in the world that's set up astronomically, you can actually kind of tell because they're off today a little bit. But the 25,920-year cycle, the precession of the equinoxes, you have the Earth's axis pointing at Polaris today, part of the Little Dipper. But 4,000 years ago, it was pointed at a star called Alpha Draconis. It was Draco. Thuban, Thuban, Alpha Draconis is part of Draco, the constellation of the dragon or the serpent. And we can get into the things related to the serpents, because in 2016, when I retired from America, I flew for American at the end of my career for 27 years. I was a captain there, but we started finding walls shaped like snakes, and that kind of just blew things wide open in that whole area. But Draco kind of looks like a serpent, and it might have been inspirational for anybody living in the northern hemisphere, maybe even down to Mexico, probably. So the dating is really important. We're still doing datings. We've been using optically stimulated luminescence dating. It's $1,000 per sample. The University of Washington's Dr. Feathers came out in 2020. He took 4 samples from the site, again, about $1,000 per sample. And we had 2 Brookhaven National Laboratory physicists that were part of his team. And their team, it's about 24 people. And they were on the site all day just gathering 2 stones and 2 sediment samples. They had to do it very carefully in dark room environment. It's a light test. And one was on top of the oracle chamber, one of the biggest chambers that's on the site. And there may be pictures of that you have. I might have sent you some. I had to go up there before they came. I was notified a few months ago before that, asking if we wanted to do it in the first place. And I said, of course we would like to do that. We're open to all sorts of testing. We don't try to hide anything. It's like, that would be fantastic, and we hadn't used OSL ever before. So I went up with a key probe. My dad used to do an archaeologist, a key handle of metal, and you can put it in the ground. It makes a tiny little hole, and you can see if you're going to hit rock. Kind of give you an idea if you're going to do an archaeological dig. Sometimes they do that, or if you want to just keep the depth of soil, to the bedrock or whatever. Well, I went out there, and the roof of that chamber had between 17 and 24 inches of dirt. I thought it was just a couple inches, like 4 or 5 inches. So they said, oh, that's a great depth. That will work for OSL. It has to be a certain depth. Well, the sample was tested, and it came back 2 years later, the results, which is normal. And they said that the dirt on top of the chamber was there in 1550 AD. So that's, again, before Mr. Patty, and that's, before Plymouth Plantation, and Roanoke and all of that. And it said that's a minimum age. That chamber was there, and that dirt came along later. So how much earlier was that chamber sitting there? Was it 4,000 years ago? That's a possibility. Yeah. And one of the serpent tails, in this serpent here, we have them from 27 feet up to 2,550 feet. They have a head, a body, and tail. They're a stone wall shaped like snakes. This one wraps around and looks like it's biting its tail. And just before the tail bends, there's a hump. And that's where they got one of the samples from that day. And that sample dated to 1400 AD. That's before Christopher Columbus made his voyage over here, So, and again, it was that the wall was there, and then the sediment very slowly builds up from wind-blown soil and vegetation decay, leaves and rotting wood, all of that slowly, and dust, And it's about 125 years for an inch of soil to build up in New England. But when you have a slope, like in front of it is a slope, it will take a little longer. But in any event, they get down there, they get a sample of soil, and it actually was able to test it. That was pretty cool. That methodology, that testing method, actually was used not only here, but a site in Milford, New Hampshire. That was a base test. They had a historic site from about 300 years ago. It was a little village that was abandoned quickly, so they know the date. So they did some OSL testing there just to calibrate, the method up here, I guess. I don't know all the particulars, but then they started testing in Connecticut, and there were sites all over Connecticut. I don't know if they did North Stonington, though. I think they did Gunjiwamp. I know they did Gunjiwamp with a couple. That's near the Navy base in Groton, Connecticut. It's
Hmm.
only a few miles from North Stonington. It's like next door. They went down into Pennsylvania, and they got some testing down there. But a prior one, 2 years earlier, with Dr. Feathers, was a Bucks County. I think it was Bucks County. I hope I'm not getting the wrong place in Pennsylvania, because there are a few different areas and counties these are located. It's a stone terracing, and everybody goes, "Oh, that's just some crazy." Some farmers built that for some purpose, just a big stone terracing structure. Well, the dates came back, and they took several samples, and you will get different dates from different parts of a structure. Well, they went back to 3000 BC. Some of that structure appears to have been there 5,000 years ago. That's before the Great Pyramid was built. And then it went up to about 500 AD. And that's so typical. Wherever you look at sites around the world, you will get a range of dates, but these are all really ancient dates. So right
Yeah.
in Pennsylvania, OSL was used there. The only thing with OSL, you have to have a certain depth of soil. It can't be disturbed with like somebody digging and turning the soil over and throwing it back down. Now you reset the clock on the dirt because the light hit it. Any sunlight or any light hits it, it contaminates it. Or if you have like little animals burrowing in and they leave a hole, don't test that area because the light's going to go in the hole, that kind of thing. But the other thing is it costs about $1,000 per sample. So you have to make sure you have the funding for that. And you got to wait about 2 years for the results.
Wow, that's a long time.
So we're still using things like that in LIDAR, and we had a DNA on some bones that were found by Mr. Goodwin almost 90 years ago. We had DNA done up in Thunder Bay, Canada on some human bones, which are pretty interesting too. So we are using whatever technology we can to try to date the site, tell us more about the site, that and who these people were, who built these
Yeah,
sites.
that's what I was gonna ask.
So
Like, who are the bones? Did you ever get back who the bones? With the bones, the DNA?
Yeah, actually, yeah. Well, the funny thing, they were found in the 1937 in a plaza area. It's kind of an open area, chambers around it, and the bedrock is visible even in the 1920 photographs before Goodwin ever showed up. There's pictures of people on the site. There were actually 4 from that year. We have those photos. One of them is in my book, as a matter of fact, so people can see it. And that's the area the bones are found. And there's like no soil there. Where the soil is just a couple inches, or it's just bedrock and there was brush. The whole hilltop is bedrock. And during the glaciers, it was all cleaned off pretty much. And then over the years, very slowly, the soil's been coming back. But there's still areas with bedrock exposed. And these bones are found by Goodwin. There are 3 different bones. 30 years later, in 1968, a woman teacher from Timberland School in New Hampshire, just down the street here, maybe about 15 miles away. She was nice. She was willing to drive him in '68 all the way down to Washington D.C. to the Smithsonian, and down there, Dr. Lucine, I believe it is St. Hoyen, a physical anthropologist, examined those bones and bones found in another chamber, and that's interesting too. But she examined the 3 bones that were, like one little grouping of bones. She goes, well, she looked at the density, the color, the texture. She goes, I believe these are human bones. She goes, they seem to be, I think she said either a little more denser, I think she said, than I would have expected, but it could be because of this particular reason. She goes, and then she kind of summarized, but at the very end of it, she goes, my personal feeling, she gave her personal feeling, is that these are human bones, all 3 of them. So they went back on display in our museum, and until 2 years ago, when a friend from out in Malibu, California, who did the Paracas skulls in South America, those oddly shaped skulls, they've been on History Channel and Discovery, he did the DNA on those, and I guess that turned out very unusual too. So we sent them up to Thunder Bay. We sent 2 of the 3. We kept one in safekeeping in case the post office lost the other 2. And we sent those 2 separately to customs. It took 4 months. No, it took 2 months to get the results back, and they checked 39,600 or 500 human DNA samples, and it turns out they're from the Mediterranean, the middle of the Mediterranean, but specifically Greek ancestry. we know the Paddy family that were on the hill back in the 17 and 1800s were from England. Now, whether they had somebody that was in the family that was of Greek ancestry, but it was very, very strong Greek, And the Paddies, I think they were English, I don't know where from going back further again, but the thing is, like I say, the two bones turned out to be related to one another, either same person or very closely related. They were from three different parts of the body, and that was interesting. So it wasn't like a dog went to a nearby graveyard. And the nearest one's about a mile away from our site, maybe a mile and a half. Drag a bone up and then chew it up on the site, having a little picnic of his own. But these are from three different parts of the body, so you'd have to drag the whole body out of a grave. But none of that really makes any sense. So we said, you know what, we're going to have to date these. So we did, and we used the same radiocarbon dating laboratory in Massachusetts that my dad used in '67. And the son is running it now. He's been running it for over 30 years. I didn't know his dad passed, Dr. Harold Kruger, actually. He had passed away in the '90s. My dad knew him very well. But the son is carrying on the work, I guess, since the '90s. And I called him up before, bringing the samples to him. And I said, can you date these? They've been out of the ground for like 85 years. This is 2 years ago. He goes, well, he says, I think we can. He goes, when they're in the ground, they actually deteriorate, and that's not good for them. They've been out of the ground for, 85, 90 years, whatever. And he goes, and if they have collagen and protein or whatever it was, he goes, you did DNA on them, right? And because I described it, he goes, they should be good for carbon dating. He says, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare them here, and I'm going to send them to the University of Arizona, Tucson, where they do mass accelerated spectrometry, because they probably don't have enough mass for me to do my conventional carbon dating. You only need 1,000th a sample, and so you don't destroy as much of the bone or whatever you're dating. And it's a little bit more accurate. They actually count the atoms, instead of like a what do you call it there, a device to measure radiation, a Geiger counter. They have, which is a sophisticated carbon-14. That's the way that's the way it began back in the '50s. They actually count the atoms separately. It's it took us 4 months to get the results back. And in this case, we only sent them one of the bones, because when they go through DNA, they actually reduce the bones. They use part of the material for the test,
Right, right, right.
So now we have like a whole bone still on display. People can see it. Yeah, one of the human bones. The other one is on display with it. Actually, the other one, we got to get it back on display. I have it in a little bag in a file cabinet right now. And then the other one was pretty much destroyed. What we get back is some crumbs. But the date came back, and it was kind of like, they weren't ancient, but they were from 1690 AD up to about 1900, with a median date 1850. And that's during the time that the Paddy family was living there for decades upon decades. They got involved in 1734 until actually Goodwin bought the site from a guy named Fred Dustin, and Dustin was part of the Paddy family. And he goes in and out of the Paddies, except for 28 years. It was with a Nathaniel H. Paul, who was a lumberman. He had a sawmill, and he bought the property back in 1863 for 28 years. And then it goes back to the Paddies again. I mean, we're going from 1734 up to 1936, over 200 years. So
Wow.
how did the Paddy family let somebody die on their property and just let them rot there, and three bones left? So
Well, and then
it became
but you also said that there was bones found inside one of the eh, what did you
the
call it?
chambers, one of the chambers, yeah.
Yeah. So
And so, yeah, that part of the human bones is still a mystery. It just raised more questions, and we're all going like, oh my gosh, every time we turn a rock over, we have more questions than answers. So somebody's laying on the site, decomposing, and the Paddies around there, so it doesn't make any, and the Greek, we don't know. It brings up a lot of fun things too. There was a serial killer in the area. It's all this weird, but we don't go too far down that road, into that rabbit hole. But it's just kind of interesting. But the other bones were found in the watch house. The watch house is a satellite chamber. It's located about 300, maybe 350 feet from the main site. It's a glacial boulder with a structure built on the west side of it, and the boulder actually, and behind the boulder, a wall goes, and it continues around counterclockwise about 16 acres of land, and that's where we did the survey work. It comes back in front of itself. There's a hump and a 90-degree tail, and that's where you get the cell dating, right at the hump. But inside the chamber back in the 1950s, very late 50s, 58, 59, we got the reports. They found a couple different bones in there, and they sent those down to the Smithsonian, and one of them was identified by that Dr. Lucine St. Hoyen. Her male colleague was more into animal bones, and he had a title, I think it was. Anyway, he looks at him. He goes, and she thought they were bison, buffalo. So he looked at him. She didn't really say anything, and he goes, "I think these are bison." She goes, "Yeah, but they're found in New Hampshire." And he goes, "Well, the woodland bison were there in the past, in the ancient past. The bison were in New Hampshire, and these are found inside the chamber. So you wonder, did somebody use them as an offering in there? We just
Wow.
don't know. What we haven't done is carbon date it. That would be something that if we had them. I would. The last dating I mentioned was it was done down at the University of Arizona Tucson, and because of that, it cost a little bit more than if Dana had done them in his laboratory in Mass. It would have been a little less expensive, but then again, you need a certain mass for him to do it.
Sure.
But it was about $700, just under $700 for the whole thing for that one carbon dating. So, but the other bones were found in there appear to be wild pig bones inside the chamber too. And again, we don't have a date on those. But another bone had a drill hole in it, and that's a little tiny bone. It's on display. Now it's found in there. And the drill hole might indicate, and it was probably done with a stone. Even Native Americans could drill holes of various sizes. And they sometimes have a little pointy thing to go through leather and softer materials. Other times they have like a reed sort of thing, and they put sand, and they have like a bow and arrow, and they move it like this, and it would spin and actually bore right. It looks like a modern drill hole in some stones. It's pretty amazing. But this bone was drilled in a stone pendant. It's actually shaped like our summer solstice sunrise monolith. That had a drill hole in it. It's maybe about this big, and the bone's about that big, so they're about the same size. They're both found in that chamber, the watch house. And that indicates somebody might have wore them for pendants,
Mm.
like jewelry. And what are they doing there inside? Are they an offering also? So it just raises a lot of questions, and
Yeah.
it's interesting because you don't think farmers would be doing that kind of thing in the 1800s and 1900s. So we actually had another bag. We're going to archive all the thousands of artifacts going back to 1937. My manager actually has been taking courses up at the New Hampshire Archaeological Society up in Concord, and he was on a 2-week excavation with them last summer, and he's going to be doing one this summer too. But he learns things very quickly. He went to school he went to St. Anselm's College. He was in high school with us before college, so he's with us for 6 years. And when he's going into his senior year, he decided he wanted to stay with us. But he got into criminal law. He graduated top of his class, and he also was a school editor, so he's helped me on my books, editing the books. But he's going to go more into archaeology and that kind of stuff. I think he wants to get certified in that, so he can actually do digging, be certified in it and everything.
Mm-hmm.
He worked on an archaic and paleo site in the northern part of New Hampshire last year for 2 weeks, which is pretty cool. My dad was a member of the group. My uncle was the vice president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society. And on the front of my book, the lady that's on the front of my book, she was with us. She was a president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society for a number of years when she joined us in '89. So we have some ties with that. We're hoping they'll get more interested because they're basically looking at colonial, and we know what colonial things look like. They get into pre-colonial, basically Native American, if you will, and they're looking at habitat sites, burial sites, workshops where they made tools. Might be an area where they were farming, or maybe an area where they were butchering animals. But when you look at stone walls, chambers, cairns, standing stones, that's not within their world. But yet these are artifacts. So we're hoping we can get their interest going because these things are right across the landscape all over the Northeast. And but the serpent walls, I think, may be a foot in the door to academia because up in Canada, these serpent walls exist up in Ontario, in Winnipeg, and Parks Canada is actually working on the ones in Winnipeg, Canada, or had a couple that came down. They drove all the way down to New Hampshire. The sister moved here 2 years ago. They were here a year and a half ago, I guess, visiting her, and she goes, "We have serpent walls up there." I said, "Do you?" Because we've heard them further out to Weed, California, and out to Denver. They have serpent walls too. And she goes, "Yeah." She goes, "In fact, we have turtle effigies. Turtle's another big one too." She goes, "The Parks Canada is helping us." So what we're hoping to do is maybe if we can get Parks Canada's attention on the ones down here, we'll force some of our institutions to take a look at these and go, "Wait a minute, something's going on from New Hampshire all the way up to Weed, California, from Denver all the way down to Alabama, but they're in Kentucky. And in those Hudson sites, they used to look at the chambers, standing stones, and cairns. Only in the last several years are they looking at the walls. They didn't pay much attention to the walls, near these structures. They're in the brush, hard to see, the thicket, if you will. but they're looking at them and they're finding out they seem to have heads and bodies and tails, just like we have at our site. And
Yeah, I was
like on
gonna
Stone,
say, I mean, 4,000 years ago, they weren't building stuff just to build stuff. Like,
exactly,
everything had
exactly.
a purpose.
Yeah,
Everything had a
it's
purpose.
crazy. They had to have a purpose, exactly. Yeah, because I mean they're trying to survive. Everything was based on survival, and to have time to go out and not only at our site, they not only gathered up field stones left by the glaciers, but one of our researchers, David Stewart Smith, was with us for 40 years. And he worked with us from 78 up to his passing in 2016. He had cancer, and I think he died at 64 or 5. And he left a big hole, with us. And we had just started finding the serpent walls that year and windows, and I got to show him a couple before he passed. But he worked in England for what is called English Heritage. Actually, he worked in Scotland. And today it's called English Heritage, but back when he was here in 72, 77, he was involved with restoration of medieval and megalithic sites. And so when he came back, he was from Connecticut. And when he came back, he was amazed that these sites existed in New England. But he worked, for about 10 years on our site. He put out a little booklet about ancient and modern quarry techniques. He counted over 300 slabs of stone within that 16-acre area, not the other 90 acres. We never did an inventory yet, and that's something we need to do because the walls are just the same kind of thing over the next 90 acres. But he concentrated on the area we surveyed for the astronomical stuff. And the booklet in '89 talks about 300 slabs. These stones actually had to be removed from the bedrock. So he had to work a fissure or crack in the bedrock, get wedges in there, pop the stone off. They raised them up. We have 34 of them today. We know now. The first one found in 1982, actually, that are, size of a couple feet across, up to 14 feet by maybe 4 or 5 feet. Some of these are very large slabs, just like what we find in the main site used for the roof slabs, or even wall slabs. They call orthostats. And some of these are in the stone walls too. Big stones stood on the side in the stone walls, which you don't see farmers doing really. And what he counted was 300 of them in those walls, and some are just stacked on top of each other horizontally. Some are actually tilted, like lacework in the walls. Some are stood on the end, as I just mentioned, they're called orthostats. And then you have the ones like these monoliths, and that's some of the astronomical lines. It's like gigantic arrowheads stood on their end. And these were not only taken off the bedrock, but they were actually, some of them you can see the serrated edge, a little dimpling, just like if you look at the edge of an arrowhead or a spear point, or even a stone axe. And we have a beautiful stone hole at our site. I didn't mention that was found by Mr. Goodwin too, with a stem still on it. The edge of it's all serrated, where somebody had either doing pressure flaking with maybe a deer antler, or they were striking it with a stone, knocking off the little flakes to get the shape they wanted. That's what they did on some of the great big multi-ton roof slabs and wall slabs and monoliths for the alignments. So in the ones out, a lot of them, they went out there and they spent quite a bit of time inventorying these, looking at them and looking for the little indication that, hey, they not only took them off the bedrock, and nature sometimes pops them off too, but they're actually shaping them. And that takes time to take a stone hammer and sit there and try it sometime. It's, if you're an expert, I'm sure it's easier if you're not an expert, they probably can do it more efficiently, but it's a lot of work. And you got to, strike the stone and you get the shape that you want, and you set it into the wall, either stand it up or whatever you're doing with it, So that's a lot of work. And so farmers wouldn't have been going around creating stones unless they wanted a gate post or stone steps, something nice and square or rectangular kind of thing. And you will see that at Shaker Village and some of the historical. You see it pretty much all over New England, You see the little drill marks, where they were drilling and they were using the plug and feather and that kind of thing. But these stones were actually shaped using a Stone Age technique at the end called percussion flaking. And to actually back that up, Dr. Gary Hume, who was a first aid archaeologist in New Hampshire back in '76, part-time, by 1980, full-time, and he got involved with our site. I think David Stewart Smith bent his ear. He brought him to our site. He did 4 projects. And one of the things that Dr. Gary Hume said was that these stone slabs are actually shaped in the manner of like a 10.5 arrowhead. And this is Stone Age, again, technology. You don't have farmers doing this kind of thing.
Right.
And he was a lithic specialist. He was an expert on how they made stone tools, the ancient people. And again, whether it's a stone axe or an arrowhead or, a spear, whatever they were making, stone knives and points and all of that. He was an expert in that area, So, but he said, this is like a grand scale of that, And so these people were actually using Stone Age technology. They used to make microliths, little tools and stuff. They're doing it on this big scale of many, many hundreds of pounds or 1,000-pound stones,
And honestly, when would a farmer have time to do that?
exactly. Yeah. Why would he, and how would he have the time?
How would he have the
I will
time?
say, well, Patty, a lot of times will say, well, Patty and his six husky sons built the site. They don't know anything about Patty. He was a shoemaker, number one. He wasn't. He had some. He was a farmer in that he had domesticated animals like everybody. He had horses, cows, a few sheep, and that kind of. We have his tax records. But he was a tax collector for 3 years from Salem. He was a fifth generation shoemaker, a cordwainer, and he also was a road surveyor. So he did all these things. He had 9 daughters and he had 2 sons. One son died 3 days shy of his 18th birthday. He was in Boston and died in Boston, which is 40 miles from here. We don't know why, but how would he, with his, I don't know if he had 9 husky daughters, but I mean, why would he even do it in the first place? And I'm
Well,
being,
and not
I'm
only
being
that,
it's silly, but
but
yeah,
not
exactly.
only that, but I mean,
Go ahead.
1800s. I mean, people talked. There would have been record, or somebody, there would have been a documentation of people saying, "Oh, they're crazy. Look what they're doing over there." Like people. There
Yeah,
would have been
yeah,
something where people were seeing these big structures being built or
exactly.
being made. Like people would have seen this. Like people were nosy back then. Everybody was in everybody's business. I mean,
Well, and you're absolutely right. And one of the roads was called the Boston Pope Road, and it was an old Indian trail, and it goes right by the watch house, and it continues over kind of to the south side of the property, southwest side of the property. They would have looked right up the hill, and there's Patty building this crazy site of a 110-acre
yeah,
site
so
with
we
all
would have
these.
seen something.
You would have seen. Well, then the stories got out that he was a mail robber, bank robber, bootlegger, and all these. It's just fanciful tales that kids tell. Even the kid and adults, they tell those stories too. And all of a sudden they become like, oh, that really happened. It's like, no, people just made that stuff up. But the history of Salem was written in 1907. Edgar Gilbert, a friend of Robert Frost, and we're in that book because the Patty family were very prominent in Salem. And he was kind of poetic like Robert Frost was, and he said it's a he goes, it's, I think the whole thing is something goes like, it's a site, mysterious site that's built above, among the soft pines in rough boulders where weird tales and legends may be woven. It was kind of more poetic than that, very, very pretty, but that's how he described the site in 1907. And it was already known then, of course. But Patty was known, I mean, again, he was a tax collector. He actually took in the town paupers, the poor people from 1831. We have actually a handwritten book. I don't know if the town knows I have it. It was handwritten from 1831 to 1836, 37, excuse me. And by that time, Patty had between, I guess it was 9 and 11 people, because his daughters had moved out. One son died, and the other son moved out. So now he's got 11 people again living in his house with his wife Betsy and him. 13 people in this wooden house up on the site. I don't know how they all fit in there, but he put a bid in each year, and he would if he was awarded, he'd be able to take these people and make money. One year he made like $300 something taking care of the people, which in 1831, 32, that's quite a bit of money back then.
Yeah.
Not that he was wealthy, but I'm sure it cost a lot to take care of 11 people. But then, maybe all these poor paupers were put to work building all this sort of stuff. It's like, really, these people would go out there, and what now with the Stone Age technology used to shape all these big stones, and some of the stones weigh, some of the roof slabs are up to 14 tons.
Yeah.
It's not, you're going to just have a bunch of amateurs out there with nothing better to do, and hey, go move that rock off the bedrock. First you had to quarry it, now you want you to shape it, now we want you to transport it,
Yeah.
put it up on that, and move it up the air, raise it several feet in the air and put it on the structure. These people were who built the site appear to be, professional stonemasons way back when.
Right.
It's not a bunch of amateurs up there just
Oh.
creating a folly, Patty's folly, or
In
whatever they want.
between farming a farm. Right.
Right, right, exactly. And
You
he
know?
had some sheep, he had some sheep and everything. But and his son Seth got into shoemaking, and his grandson. So actually, he was a fifth generation, and there was actually his grandson who had a shoe shop down the street. So there are actually 7 generations of shoemakers. And they actually operated ferries across the Merrimack River. And Peter's the guy that came over from England, went to Virginia, left his wife behind and his first son, came to Salem, Mass, moved up to Haverhill, and he wanted to operate a ferry. They thought he left his wife behind and abandoned her, and they found out, in fact, he did not. He was trying to send for her, and they had to look into this whole thing. So they wanted to warn him out of town, get rid of him. He wanted to do a ferry. They wanted to deny him to build a ferry, plus doing shoes, doing shoes. Eventually, they found out that he was telling the truth. He married another woman, and he had one of his oldest son, I think, was named Simon at that time, with his new wife. All of a sudden, Richard, his son from Virginia, shows up. So it was a tradition of the oldest son getting all the inheritance. I'm sure Simon wasn't too happy at that time, but it was Peter from England and Richard, his son, and Steph, and then Jonathan, this guy that we talk a lot about. Having the paupers. When his kids grew up, you know, he had room in his house, so the paupers were there. And then we believe he got involved in the Underground Railway. He was an abolitionist. So when the paupers were no longer there in 38, until his death in 1849, there's a window of over a dozen years where we believe he was taking in the Underground Railway. The slaves would move up to Canada. I guess that was their goal. And there's other places like the House of Seven Gables in Mass. There's one on the next pond up the street from us, Big Island Pond. There was one of the stations, underground stations. We were an underground station. You had conductors. It's like a railroad. You had conductors. You had stations. That kind of thing. And you had to move these people. And it talks about at our site a Mr. Hussey, a Mr. Poor, and a Mr. Donald from Shawshene Village. That's about 15 miles south of us in Massachusetts. And in the middle of the night, one of them with a horse named Nellie would actually bring them up to Patty's home, and they would probably stay in his cellar. That's an interesting thing, the cellar. If you ever come up and visit, I'll show you what I mean. But we think they hid the slaves in a part of the cellar, and we think we know where. But then whoever it was, Mr. Poor Donald, would go back to Shawshene Village and be back in time for breakfast. So it had to be done very quietly, and they were only at our place for a very short time. It was against the law to help slaves. There was a fugitive law or whatever, a furtive law, I think they called it, 1850, that was passed. That said not only couldn't you help slaves, you had to return them. When Patty was alive in 1849, I think it was the year before that law, you could not help slaves. And if you did help and you were found, they could actually arrest you. And I mean, you could lose your savings, you could lose your home. It was a kind of a big risk, so it had to be done very, very quietly. But I think that time period was after the paupers were no longer. The town built a poor farm, and the Patty family didn't do that anymore. So there's a window to the time Patty dies, So a lot of history in the site, both
So
historical
much history. So much history. I mean,
and it being a ceremonial site too.
well, I want to get to the ceremonial stuff and like the more of the, but I want to say I love sites like this because us in the U.S. and it's always and we say this a lot on podcasts everywhere and paranormal talk and this and that oh the UK they're so much older, they have so much older structures over there, which yes, the structures are older, but when you look at places like this, you know what I mean? This is 4,000 years old, right? I mean, so the structures on this property are 4,000. Some of them are 4,000 years old. I mean, even in Gettysburg, Devil's Den, those big boulders, they are thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. These were living places for people, people back then. So these are still 4,000-year-old structures in the United States.
That's a great point. I mean, yeah, we do have an ancient past here.
We
I've heard this
do,
on
we do.
TV. One of the people that ended up on the Today Show, she was working in Boston in the station. Really nice. She was with us all day working on Where in the World Is. They did Matt Lauer, and she was up doing Where in the World Is. And I don't mention names. She's very, very nice, though. But I saw her on Today. She's been on Today Show for quite a few years now. She has her own Saturday TV show, too, on NBC. But she worked with, I was just with her, the cameraman, all morning. It was great. But I saw her talking to Savannah Guthrie, and Savannah had just come back from the Middle East about there's so much ancient history there, a lot of religious, but ancient history, just layers of it, And one of the comments by the one I'm mentioning was, isn't it a shame we don't have any ancient history in the U.S.? And, if even if it's not our site, but Mesa Verde was the first national archaeological site, national park, and we've been out there. We've stayed in the park before. You could stay at the hotel there. We've done that. We also stayed down at Durango, which is right near it. But Mesa Verde is just one example of thousands of those type of sites in the Four Corners. Indian medicine wheels up in Wyoming we visited. That's an amazing 10,000-foot mountain with this big wheel, and it's aligned with the summer solstice and 3-star alignments. It looks like a wagon wheel. It's called Indian medicine wheel. And they go right into Saskatchewan. But I mean, and then we have, and then we have all the different types of keevers and all the artwork in the Southwest. And then we have they estimate 1 million ancient mounds built from the Ohio Valley right down to the Rio Grande by the ancient people. A million. And I mentioned Goodwin working in Ohio, and there used to be 10,000 just in Ohio. Indiana, they estimate had 5,000. They look like wedding cakes, like layers, layered pyramids. I've seen them in Mexico, and I've been on Mexico a number of times. Some of them are conical shaped, and those usually are burials for the most part, burial mounds, kind of the conical shaped ones. And others are shaped like animals, and it could be like an eagle. It can be like bears, like out in Wisconsin. There's Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, and that's in Peebles in Adams County. We were there 2 years ago, and I've been wanting to go there since the 90s. And I used to fly when I flew for American and another airline. I used to go through Ohio, Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati all the time. But this place is pretty remote. If you go there, you have to drive 2 hours from Cincinnati to get to it. So it's pretty remote in Ohio, but it's such an amazing site. Up the street is some of the other sites, like the Site Mound is just south of there, and then Chillicothe, Ohio, has amazing earthworks. And so when you say it's too bad we don't have any ancient sites, the country's loaded with them. East
Yeah,
Coast, the West Coast, they go right into southern
100%.
Canada, right down to Rio, and then Mexico had 100,000 temples, so we know that that's accepted, you know. But here
Yeah,
it's like, oh yeah, we don't have anything old, you know. So
right.
you have a
Yeah, just
good
because
point
it
you
doesn't
brought up.
have
Excellent.
just because it
Yep,
doesn't
yep.
have a castle or, this, that, it doesn't mean that we don't have
Yeah.
ancient living. I mean, that, and it's places like this that prove that we do. I mean, um,
Mm.
it's, and I want to get to kind of like, some of the, like the unexplained phenomena, the paranormal stuff, the ceremonial stuff. I think there's a believed to be a ceremonial structure on the property.
Yeah, actually, that's true. I think the site itself, the hilltop, I think was sacred. You know, I mean, that's a feeling we have. I know it's not scientific, but when you look at the whole site and you compare it to other sites around the world, whether it's on the other side of the pond over in the western part of Europe, where there are 50,000 megalithic sites. We've been to Mexico, we've been to Greece and different places, you know, all over Europe and stuff. I've been to Northern Africa too, but it has a ceremonial feel to the site. I think it was a sacred site. I don't think it was a place that people actually used as a living. And the question, in our archaeologist, I mentioned uh, the lady that was with us for all those years. That was one of her goals is to discover where the people lived. We think they lived in hide, wood, or bark, and those are perishable. They're harder to find because they'd be underneath the earth. So she looked at the landscape around the hill where there were flat areas with good drainage, not too far from water. And we found a couple. We found a workshop, we found a wigwam site, that kind of thing, but not enough to indicate a big population yet, So we're using LIDAR. That may help us with that. I think it's a ceremonial site as much as Stonehenge is. It's a monument. It's also a place where people were buried because there's cremation ashes there. It was a place of worship, obviously, and they tied all of that together, I think, just at that one site. But Stonehenge is so unique, and it's just, again, one of 50,000 megalithic sites. You go see Stonehenge, you've seen one of 50,000. Don't think you've seen it all, You go to Ireland, you go to Newgrange. That's kind of like Ireland's equivalent to Stonehenge, Callanash in Scotland. But you see a lot of the chambers at our site look like some of the Western European structures, the size, the shape, the orientation. And they were not places like the Flintstones where the people lived in the little stone houses like the Bonnie and, Fred and Wilmer and all of
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
However, I will say that the Oracle Chamber does have a bed. The Oracle Chamber does have 5 closets. It does have a stone bench seat, and it has 2 underground drains to keep it dry. It has the
yeah.
exit
See,
where people walk through was a window, and it's an amazing structure with a hole that goes through to the sacrificial table, 6 feet underground. When Goodwin was there in the 30s, a young man named Paul discovered there was a plug inside the chamber. He got a kitchen knife because he had a little bunkhouse just outside the chain link fence. He ran out, got the knife, he wiggled the stone, pulled it. There's a 6-foot hole in the wall, and they called it a closet back in 1937. 38, you're outside digging next to the table, and the table looked like it was sitting on dirt. When they dug down, they were astonished to see there's 4 stone legs supporting it. It was set up on legs, and it was over 3 feet about 3 feet of dirt they had to dig from underneath it. And when they got down where the area of where the hole was kind of pointing towards, that 6-foot, there was another block of stone. It didn't seem to, because when you stack stone, you want to have like bricks, 1 over 2, or that kind of thing. It was just kind of, it looked like a square with a block, and they pulled it out, and now you got a hole. And that end of it under the table is actually flared like a clarinet or a trumpet, the end of it, kind of
Yeah.
for acoustical purposes. If you go inside the chamber, you stand on a part of the bedrock that they left, and somebody between 5.5 and 6 feet tall is just about right. You get a little taller than that, you hit your head. But you can yell through that tube, and the voice comes out underneath the table, and there's a platform above the table where we think people would watch a ceremony. So again, we think it's a ceremonial site, and all the questions come up is when would they have a ceremony? Why would they have a ceremony? Who are these people doing the ceremony? But we think during the astronomical alignments, we have 57 of them that we know of today, with a summer solstice, winter solstice, spring and fall equinox. Those are called quarter days. The cross quarter days, some people are familiar, some are not, but you probably recognize the modern day version of the holiday because some of them are like November 1st. That's All Saints Day, the day after Halloween. It's called Samhain or Samhain, Samhain by the Celts. But it's also found at Mesa Verde. When I was there in 1990 the first time, like, my gosh, they got that crop of it. They're also February 1st, and that's the day around Groundhog Day. It's Candlemas in the Catholic. They call it Imbolc, the Celts. And then you have May Day, and they used to have the Mayfires. And we used to have maypoles over here. When I grew up in the 60s and 70s, we had Mayfairs. I think that's kind of gone away, based on the ancient tradition of Beltane, May Day, the Beltane. And they had the fires of Beltane and stuff. We have a huge monolith. It's over, well, it's about 8 feet or 8.5 feet tall. It has fallen down. We wish it was still standing. We try not to reconstruct the site, though, but it would be awesome to see it still standing.
Right,
Just
right.
like Stonehenge, some of the stones of Stonehenge are falling. And then we have the November, then we got to August 1st. And August 1st is an old Norwegian holiday. It's called Lammas, Lagnasa by the ancient Celts. And these cross-quarter days are actually the beginning of ancient seasons. I don't know if you ever heard, we had the summer solstice, the first day of summer, but you also had the midsummer solstice, sunrise and sunset. Why is it mid if you just said it's the first day of summer? Well, actually, May Day would be in the ancient. They thought that was the beginning of summer. By June 20th to 21st, you had the middle of summer. August 1st, the end of summer, beginning of fall. And you had the mid fall, September 21st or 2nd. And then you go to November, the beginning of winter, and it goes right like that around the calendar. We have all those alignments. So maybe people gathered, and it was like a pilgrimage to our site. Because our site seems to be a little different than some of the other sites I mentioned already that are kind of spread out across counties or towns. Even though Stonington has a huge density of structures, but you still have to walk. You don't see a central plaza area. All the structures are kind of surrounding this whole thing in a very tight area. And that's what our site has. So, but we have everything that you can find, whether you're in New York or Rhode Island or anywhere, even up in Ontario, all the way to Virginia, you can see the same kind of stonework, size, shape, orientation of the structures that we have in America Stone. It's like a Reader's Digest version of a lot of these places, kind of compressed. I think that's why it's a little different of the 800 places, It's hard to articulate it, but that's what it seems to be, it makes it a little different. It's got all these different features on 110 acres, And then that 1 acre areas, that 1 acre with the fences, that's really high density of structures, including the sacrificial table and some of the other chambers. So I think during ceremonial times, maybe there was a death in the family, people would gather there, maybe when there was a birth. The table, we don't know if it's sacrificial. Some people think it's a birthing table. It's 9 feet by 6 feet. It's got that big groove on it that goes in a runnel into a bedrock where there's a cutout where it's all there. It's like, that's not a coincidence that cutout in the bedrock is there with the runnel coming off. Some
Right.
skeptics say, oh, that's a limestone for making soap. They're usually about 36 to 40 inches across, about an inch thick stone with a perfect circle, a very, very thin circle. And they're used for soap making. Put a barrel, put ashes, drain the water through the ashes, mix that with animal fats and so forth. You make your soap. This thing's 9,000 pounds, and it's in a very tight area between the ramp where people might stand and look down, and then the oracle chambers on the other side of the table. And other people, well, that's where they made apple cider. And how would you get your horse in there on a wagon? There's no possible way. I have a friend, one of the researchers, she's on TV with Scott Walters. She was into rodeo, and she had her own horses. Her mom still has horses in Texas and everything. Did you get your horse down there? She goes, no. I said, how would you get your horse in a cart in there? She goes, you can't. So none of that makes sense that it's an apple cider factory with the table being the cider press, or a limestone for making soap like the Ivy Soap Factory. But that's what some of the mainstream, you'll hear that out there. If you look at some YouTube, you'll hear that. It's like, they're not even doing any thinking about it. They're just throwing this out there. They have a title, and people are supposed to believe them. It sounds like politics, I guess.
Yeah,
But
I mean, it's strange to me that there are people out there that are questioning when you do have so much science, archaeological research as to and dating back. Why is it that they want to try to convince that this was farmers in 1800s? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't.
absolutely,
I mean,
yeah.
you have the scientific, you have the archaeological, you have the historical society, you have all this factual information of things carbon dating back to 4,000, 3,000, even 1,800 years. You know what I mean? Like you have all this stuff, and yet you're getting all this
Yeah.
kickback
I
that
think they have enough data now, and evidence, and not to sound arrogant at all, but I mean, we have enough data now with all of that. I think anybody that has this amount of data that's been collected since the 1930s, and particularly in the 60s with carbon dating, the astronomical data all took place starting in that time, that it would be up to them to prove all this data is wrong, that the
right,
site is built by some crazy farmer. Plus, the other thing I heard when I was growing up too is, well, if this is a culture of stone builders, how come there's not other sites? And like, back in the early 70s, I think by 1960, 68, I saw it in a group called NERA. My dad started a group in 64 on top of everything else. The group is still going today. It's called the New England Antiquities Research Association. They just had their 60th anniversary in New Hampshire. The next meeting will be, let's see, it's going to be in New York. I'm trying to think. Killfish, New York is where the next meeting. So they have their meetings all over the Northeast. They had one of the presidents was from Halifax, Canada, and we have chapter members up there in Ontario, Quebec. So my dad started a group in '64 to do research, a nonprofit group, and they've been going all these years, doing research. And again, about 200 sites were known and listed in one of their publications in '68. So by '70, when I started guiding, probably 200, a little bit more. But I used to hear, oh yeah, where's all these other sites around the Northeast? I'm like, there's about 200 of them that are all over the Northeast. They just don't know that, so they're using that as an argument against any ancient culture of stone builders because they should be more widespread. They just basically stated something that actually proved that they're not right, because we do
right,
have 200 sites, it's like they made a statement and then, the answer was, yes, we have 200 sites, so
right.
yeah, we could have a culture. So David Stuart Smith, before he died, so it's like we have an ancient stone building culture or lithic culture across the Northeast that's been kind of under the radar, ignored, even ridiculed by mainstream scholars, historians, and particularly archaeologists as being nothing more than the works of crazy farmers, and that still persists a little bit today. But I think David kind of summarized it kind of nicely, before he passed away, So, but it'd be kind of hard to explain things like the serpent walls. We have basically 16 of them on our site, but they go all the way out to Weed, California, and Weed has chevron-shaped walls like we do. They have the zigzag walls. In my new book coming out, we'll be talking all about these stone walls. We think we'll have it out for the summer solstice. And it'll be my third book. The first one was more of a souvenir book in 2018, which replaced the 1996 souvenir book. And then my book came out on the equinox last year, and that replaced the 2003 book my dad had done with another author, which replaced a 1977 book, which kind of replaced Goodwin's 1946 book. So there's a
Right.
lot of books written about this, and it's not all a bunch of weirdo fringe people, lunatics that we've been called. And you don't hear that so much, but we used to hear that more years ago. We're a bunch of
Oh,
lunatics,
I
fringe,
don't think so.
crazy
I
people.
think I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I
I,
mean, we
I
have a lot
would
of
love
information.
I would love to see your place. It fascinates me. Um, have you ever experienced anything on the property?
Oh, yeah, I mean, the only thing I really, first off, you feel a lot of peace up there. When I was a kid, I used to hear stories about the sacrificial table. Little kids' imagination runs away
Sure.
with you. But by 1970, when I was a guide, we actually, in '72, I remember that year, I graduated from high school, they had electricity put in there in the '50s, so we had some of the chambers lit up. So we ran a TV. We brought a TV up there, black and white, 1972. We stayed overnight in the Oracle Chamber. There was probably about 6 or 7 of us guys that stayed overnight. We did that a few times, in the early '70s. A lot of fun. And we stayed up there to, your kids, you still hear the spooky stories and, this sort of stuff while we watched the Planet of the Apes on the sacrificial table. But what I have just a couple of years ago is walking my dog up, and the the whole 110 acres is behind us. We bought 2 acres separately from that in 1985. Built a house here. It was so fortunate that this land was available because it abuts the property. And there's other neighbors here. There's about 5 or 6 houses on this cul-de-sac. We're just so fortunate to do that. But I was walking my dog up. I do that about every night. Keep an eye on the place. Make sure there's nothing weird going on. People not messing around or that kind of thing. We have some nice neighbors that keep an eye on it too. So I was going up there and I heard these kids' voices. And I'm like, oh crap, My dog did not react, and she reacts to everything. She's a Nova Scotia duck tolling retriever. She's a sweetheart, but she reacts to anything up there. I mean, I'm surprised she's not barking right now. There might be maybe a branch fell on the ground. She'll be barking. She's crazy. She's a crazy dog. But I heard these kids' voices, and I'm walking up towards the summer solstice sunset stone, and we probably live about 700 or 800 feet from it, and that stone's about 600 feet from the main site. So we're walking up the hill, hearing these kids' voices, and then it kind of disappeared. Then I heard them again, and I'm going up the hill, walking up the grade, getting close to the stone, and I heard them again. I'm like, gee, she's not barking. So I got near the stone, and from there you can see many, many acres of the whole hilltop. We did a forestry thing a couple of years ago and thinned out the entire hilltop for the health of the forest, and so we can see the alignments. And we wanted to back the trees away from all the walls just to protect them from falling on the walls and
Yeah,
uprooting.
yeah,
But
sure.
it was a really good thing we did. But I'm looking way out in the distance, and I'm like, okay, where the heck are these kids? Maybe they went into the main site, into the oracle chamber. I'm thinking that. And I'm gonna, these are kids. And we were all kids at one time, but it kind of makes you mad when people trespass.
Yeah.
Sometimes they do vandalism. And the other thing is, it's after hours. You want to come up, you have to pay, just like when you go into any place,
Yeah.
we have our hours of operation. And the only way to keep this place going is through people coming in and patronizing us, basically, and we try to take good care of our visitors. So I get up there, and I'm still not seeing anything. I go into the main site. I go into the oracle chamber. I'm like, why the heck are these kids? It sounded like several. And one of our psychics on the coast, she has her own, she's been on public, local cable access TV. She's had her own shows on that. She's written books. She just came up with a new book. She's part of a group on the coast of New Hampshire. And she's really, really nice. It's very nice. She always stays in touch with me. I mentioned this. She goes, and in her book, she actually talks about when she did a nighttime thing, she heard children up there too. So, and James, our manager, said he only told me this about 2 months ago. He's been with us since 2018. He goes, back a couple of years ago, he goes, I heard kids up there, and I went looking for them, and and you can see. I mean, there's nowhere to hide, right? And so there's something that was kind of, makes it hairs go up on your back. You don't know what it is, you can't explain it. And these kids should have been right there. And I would say, I was guessing probably 4 or 5 kids, and probably, I'm thinking maybe like 10, 12, 13 years old kind of kids, they didn't have the voices seemed like kid voices a little bit more than, more like, not puberty, not older. Yeah, and I think that's what Lynn had and what James did. And my wife has had some stuff up there too, though she doesn't really like to talk about it. But we have had Hans Holzer. You familiar with Hans Holzer, the father of the paranormal?
Yes.
Yeah, and he came up starting in 1970, and in 1992, in Columbus's 500th year anniversary, he wrote the book Long Before Columbus, which I have, I think, upstairs in my bedroom or at the museum. I think it's here because I was doing some research on it. And so he came up many times in the 70s, and he brought up Ethel Myers. She was a famous psychic at the time in 74, November 12th. My mom picked him up at the Manchester Airport in Northeast. Actually, it would have been Delta Airlines because they merged at the time. But she picked him up, brought him to our site. Back in the summer, brought up Igmund Beckman. Nancy Abel came up. He brought up these psychics separately, a few months apart, and even into 75, he brought up another person, a fourth one, which I don't remember that person's name. In that book, they give their readings of, what they felt, who the people may have been, why were they here, why they built the site, what happened. And you read this, there's 3 of them, and he put in the 3 one that I mentioned there, and then he mentions a 4th one. I don't think he really did much with that particular reading. But Hans came over the years, and then 76, he actually came up and he did the In Search of with Leonard Nimoy, who ran 144 episodes on ABC, and we were the 2nd episode, and he actually directed that particular episode. So in 2020, David Schrader from Minneapolis, I'd been on his radio show a couple of years before that. He actually went into being the the host, I guess, of the Holzer Files with Cindy Kozar, the psychic.
Yes.
And she's from Ashland, New Hampshire. She lives in Colorado. And Shane, I think it's Shane's last name. I apologize. But they came up for a whole week with a whole crew from California, makeup artists from Virginia. They came up from all over the place. And the whole week they were up there. They have three different producers with them too from California. And we had a great time, except they weren't really supposed to talk to us because they didn't want us contaminating them with our what we're talking about right now. But that show aired in 2021, and you can see the results of that. It was called Ancient Evil, and it was all about Hans Holzer and his daughter Alexandra. Actually came up from New York City. She usually did her little spot from her home in New York City, and I had said this went on for a couple of months of talking to these people before they came out. I said, "Can you get Alexandra? I've never met her. I met her dad, 50 something years ago. I met her many times, but I'd like to meet the daughter. She's the youngest of his daughters, and she was part of that show. So they actually brought her up, and there she was, and I got to meet her, and I stayed in
That's
touch.
so cool. That's so cool.
But in '74, when Ethel Myers was there, Betty Hill of the Bonnie and Betty Hill abduction in New Hampshire, the famous Betty and Bonnie Hill,
Yes.
they Betty came up, and she must have saw this was going to happen. I can only imagine she read a newspaper and saw that Hans Holz was coming up with Ethel Myers, November 12th, because she showed up with an alien head. And I don't know if Kathleen Martin, her niece, was with her at that particular, but Kathleen Martin's been to the place, and I've talked to her since. She wrote a couple books with Stanton Friedman about UFOs, and Stanton died about 2019, I think. But anyway, I got to meet Betty many times. Her husband, Barney, had died in '69 from cancer, so we never got a chance to meet Barney. But she grew up only 15 miles away in Kingston, New Hampshire. She was living in Portsmouth on the seacoast. And she apparently got a reading by Ethel Myers that night. So I mentioned to Alexander, have you ever seen anything with a reading of Betty Hill's experience with Ethel Myers, the psychic, doing the reading? She goes, my dad has so many different 8 millimeter films, so many different, he recorded and he filmed everything. And he had, like my dad, he just kept everything. She goes, if I find that, I said, if you find that, it's going to be pretty amazing to see what they said. Because I think people that are into paranormal, whether it's UFOs, spirit, are going to be like to see that. Well,
Yeah.
that show ran for 2 years on Discovery. It's on Discovery Network. Was on Travel Channel. Discovery, they're the ones. They actually brought Scott Walters over for that one of the to be part of that show too. He flew in for a couple of days, and I've known him going back to 2009 before he even got on America on Earth on History Channel as a host. So it's kind of fun to meet him, and then they brought in a Native American, and this Native American, Daryl Jameson from the Wampanoag in Massachusetts, the branch of that. He's a chief. Chief Black Eagle, and I've met him before. He says when I came up 2015 or 16 for the first time, he actually fainted or had a big spell on the site because this is not my people, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so when they brought him back for the filming in 2020, he'd only go halfway between the visitor center and the watch house. They set up a whole thing on the trail that goes up there. It became like a studio at night. I'm like, oh my God, all these cameras and tents, and it was like a little Hollywood production in the middle of the night, right in the middle, because he would not go up on the site to do it. He goes, the site is amazing. He goes, I do have 23% Orkney Island blood. He did a DNA test, and he says, I believe I'm related to Sir Henry St. Clair, Earl of the Orkneys, who some people suggest came to the New World in 1398. And there's a knight carved in Westford, Massachusetts, 25 miles southwest of here. It's a knight, and it was supposedly a distant relative of Sir Henry St. Clair, Sir James Gunn, the Gunn family, very, very famous too. And if you know about Da Vinci Code with Dan Brown and everything, the Rosslyn Chapel, the St. Clairs, it's all part of that whole thing. And Sir Henry St. Clair came here, they think. We don't know exactly what he was doing here, but Sir Daryl Jameson goes, my name is Daryl Jameson. Jameson. He goes, I believe I am related to Sir James Gunn. Because, it's like Leif Erikson, his father. So Leif was the son of Eric, so it's Eric's son. You know how that goes? And it's the same
Gotcha.
thing.
Yes.
Because I believe I am a descendant. My DNA is Orkney Island blood, and that's with it. Sir Henry St. Clair, Earl of the Orkneys, Premier Noble of Norway, and Duke of Denmark, and all of that. And he had a fleet bigger than the Norwegian king. And it's a mystery, but they think he came here 100 years before Columbus. And by the way, Columbus actually marries his granddaughter, which is freaking weird. I mean, people can look that up too. That's my understanding. I'm like, what the heck? In our
Yes.
museum, we have a full cast of that knight with a sword. It's broken. That means you died. That means you're deaf. And that's still on the street down in Western Massachusetts. The
Wow.
library has an exhibit, the museum. So Jameson doesn't think that his Native American ancestors are involved in the stonework. He thinks it's somebody else,
Well,
That's his origin. Yeah.
it sounds like this is the type of a place that would attract more of the the ancient spiritual vibes slash UFO alien slash type of you know what I mean, because of the way things were set up for spiritual and
Mm.
align with the stars and the planets, and you know what I mean, like it seems like that connection might be bigger than Casper running around. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, there's
yeah,
astronomical and it's and astrology. People, the astrology and astronomy and spiritual. Definitely they're looking up at the heavens.
yeah,
And it is kind of, I guess New Hampshire is one of the, there are a few hot spots in the world, of course. We had the incident at Exeter in 65 and then Bonnie and Betty Hill 61 up in the White Mountains. But yeah, there's been a lot of different events. In fact, within a 3-day period, one of our part-timers who lives next to the property, and she was there in 68 as a child, and her mom finally passed. She actually moved. She had a couple businesses. She moved back, and she's living in her mom's house, but in her back window, looking up at our site at the hill. One night, she saw something. She goes, "Oh, it's the moon out there." And then she looked to her right through her window, and she goes, "No, there's the moon over there." And that same night, on the night after, my daughter-in-law was out walking her little beagle. They live next door to us, over in that direction, which is nice. They're close by with our granddaughter next door. She went out back and she saw something very, very unusual. And her brother flies helicopters and he flies airplanes and he works for Space Composites out in the Mojave Desert. So she's kind of involved, aviation kind of orientation too. But she goes, "I've never seen anything like that." And the next day, I was out collecting firewood on our site, and I looked up and I said, "Gee, it looks like an airplane up there, kind of silvery looking." And I mean, I flew 30,000 hours, in my career, so I had a lot of flying, had a lot of experience. And I'm like, okay. And then I'm get on my ATV and ride down, pick up a little, still sitting there. Jets are moving along. If they're above 10,000 feet, you can go, 500. Below 10, you have to go 250 knots, 288 miles per hour. That is the speed limit, just like you see a speed limit on a highway.
sure.
Anyway, this thing's just sitting there. What the hell is that thing still sitting there? Like 3 minutes later, and I go back. I'm like, and so then I traveled on my ATV, looking through the tree branches, looking up, trying to watch it. It's like it's still there. And I watched that for several minutes, and it's like, to me, it looked like a fuselage with no wings, it just sat there. That was all within a 3-day period where three of us saw three different things. One of our visitors came up a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe, and she, with her mom, were driving, and she sent me it afterwards from when she was driving back. She sent me the video. It was actually a cube over our site. It was just one of those big cubes, which
Wow.
you've seen on different UFO shows,
Right, right,
It's like,
sure.
well, what the hell is that? So, yeah, we have things here. And when I saw her 4 years ago in February, looking out our Palladium window, looking to the west below Manchester, New Hampshire Airport, where I went to fly, and I've been watching planes since we moved here in '86 from this position, watching planes land on runway 6, 35, or 18, or runway 24. Anyway, I'm watching. I'm like, what the heck? I don't see any strobe lights. I don't see any position lights or nav lights. I don't see any rotating beacon. I just see a very, very bright light. And that's possible because landing lights are extremely bright on planes. They're incredibly bright. So they might obscure anything else, that you can't see. But I'm watching it for about 3 seconds, and it's not in a position for any of those runways. It seems to be too high for runway 35 landing north or landing to the northeast on runway
Sure.
6. I'm like, what the heck? Well, maybe it's passing over the field because you come below 10, you turn your landing light on, so you can be seen by other aircraft. It's a good thing. Anyway, coming in, and depending on the airline, they have different procedures. But anyway, then you come in and you land, maybe runway 24. But the thing, I'm watching it, and it was a brighter than normal landing light, I would say, for about 3 seconds. All of a sudden, it went straight to the ground instantaneously. It was like that. And it was not a meteor. I've seen meteors both flying and on the ground. This thing was just extremely bright, and it headed for the ground immediately. I brought that up with Kathleen Martin. Again, she's Betty Hill's niece, and she's with MUFON, and she's on TV quite a bit. I mean, you flip the channel, there she said, "I've only heard that at Skinwalker Ranch and with reptilians." I'll just throw that out there. I'm like,
It's funny
oh,
because I
okay.
was gonna say, I was like, your place almost could be like a Skinwalker Ranch type of a place, like minus the animal things. You know what I mean? Like it seems like it could be like just a hotbed for everything. It's
It could, yeah. That and the other ranch. What's the other one? I saw that one on too. The Kinshaw or Kinshaw Ranch, I think, out in Arizona. Actually, friend Scott Walters went to that not long ago, and his friend Haley, and she sent me some video. I said, "Oh, a Bradshaw Ranch, I think it's called. It's another skinwalker, but down in, I think, in Arizona, maybe. If your viewers know, I'm sure they've heard it. It might be New Mexico or I think it was Arizona. That sounds like another place that has all sorts of things. Whether it's animals or whether it's yeah, cause battery. We do one thing our site does is cause batteries to die a lot. Whether you have a professional film crew in there and they have charged batteries. Our lidar guy came in with his $16,000 360 camera. He came over here from Connecticut 2 hours with another friend of his. And she actually came in from Michigan, from the Ancient Archaeological Preservation Society. They have conventions out there below Marquette. It's 50 miles south of Marquette, and they have these big ancient mystery sites. Like, in fact, she's invited me to speak there. She was with him, and she goes, "What the heck did you do? Forget to charge it up in Connecticut? Did you bring your other batteries?" She was being nice, but kind of giving him a little ribbing.
Sure.
And he was like, I felt bad for him because not because of her, but I just felt bad because he came all the way up. He's going to show me his brand new camera. The batteries are completely discharged. He goes, I left the house and these are 100%, and this thing is a new unit. He got it like a few months before that. And you see that over and over again at our site, electrical discharges, but it doesn't happen every time, but it happens quite often. It's just like, even with me, I got my phone's charged up. I was like, why is that? But it doesn't happen all the time. But
Right.
it does happen. We've seen that with professionals, amateurs, and just regular people coming through filming and stuff. And they're like, my drone ain't working. The batteries
Well,
are dead. The
do you
controller's dead.
so
So
you
it's just
allow
funny like
people
that.
so you allow people to come to the site and film and stuff? I mean, is that something that people have to set up with you if they want to film and everything, or
Um, on a daily basis, people can take all the pictures and do all the videotaping they want. If they're doing something, I guess, commercial, we have like a policy on our website, or they can call us and find out more about it if it's a commercial operation. And we're pretty good with them too, because I mean, a lot of them are just there. They want to show an interesting site, and that's good. I mean, most people do. But if there was they had some other sort of ulterior motive, and we know probably when it is private property. And with special permission, we'll allow drones. But I mean, we've had people actually go into the parking lot, pull down by the front road, and I guess they didn't want to pay admission. They took their drone and flew it over the hill, which was
oh no,
really, it was not. I mean, it was kind of we kind of laughed at it, but the thing is, they really shouldn't be doing that.
yeah,
Without it's just being disrespectful, if you will, because
yeah, for sure.
they weren't given they weren't given permission to do that. And if somebody got hurt, the liability insurance, I can see that becoming a problem if somebody got hurt. But why? And they were buzzing the site with it, and they were kind of low, and it kind of, some people
Well,
don't
and
like
here's the
that.
thing, why wouldn't you want to donate and give some money to the site for the preservation and for the
Yeah,
research? That's what
yeah,
it's for.
yeah,
You're not doing it to make money, you're doing it to
yeah,
preserve and to do research and to keep the site going, and
yeah,
that's the
yeah.
point of
And
that's the
yeah.
point of it.
Yeah, we pay taxes actually. Nero was a nonprofit, but this is actually incorporated. So you're right about that. I mean, it's the only way to keep the place going. We receive no funding. Sometimes people will give us some money for something very nice. This is for research. Now we can pay for some lidar. We can pay for whatever. But we have wages. James he's on full time. And he's
Do
got a wife
people
and a home,
Do you
and
find
he's
that people leave things, like, the only place I can compare it to would be Column Sill, it's another megalith park, but, I mean, you
mm,
walk around there and at some of the structures, people have left offerings.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, we do that. We get flowers and other things left sometimes on the table. Although that area we have it kind of a chain to keep people out of that area because people are climbing on the table, causing some damage to it. Sometimes
Oh,
people are lighting candles, letting the wax melt onto the table,
oh, come on.
and it's kind of again disrespectful if
Yeah,
we have signs up there. Come up, enjoy the site. Don't take anything except pictures. You leave nothing but memory with your memories. We don't want trash left behind. We don't want people taking souvenir rock. It's like Stonehenge. Years ago, they used to have a little hammer, I guess, hanging. I've been to Stonehenge several times. I never saw it, but I think it's before I went there in the 80s for the first time. And they had a hammer there. You could actually try to strike the stone and take a chip home with you. Can you imagine a million people doing that? That stone is extreme. The dolomite is very tough. But you have a million people tapping even one of the toughest types of rocks. You're going to ruin it, You're going to
right,
destroy
right.
it. You may have a little sample at home. And next thing you know, the wife or the husband sees it and says, "What's that?" "Oh, it's a rock from, oh, I don't know." And then they throw it away. It's like, I mean, it's just like, you don't want that to happen whatsoever. But we have had people take pottery from the place that they found on the ground. Some people have taken other things. And funny enough, we've had people actually send things back even 60 years later saying, "I've had this.
Really?
Um, I felt guilty about it all these years, and some things have happened sometimes. I wonder if it's because I stole this as a guilt trip. Uh, this is to show my respect. They send it back. We're thankful for that. That's
Yeah,
nice.
for sure,
We
for sure.
appreciate it. Thank you for bringing it back. It turned out to be a good positive thing at the end. Uh, and so that's good. That does happen. Yeah, flowers and different types of things people have left up there. Even like little different types of stone, that aren't native to our site. We have mostly granite. We have some quartz and quartz crystal. But you'll find other types of stone up there, like, okay, where did that, crystals and stuff like that, or just man-made crystals,
Yeah.
first designed, and they'll leave that. Um, Somebody landed the drone again. I went out and I was mowing the lawn in the backyard, and they had been filming at night, which I'm not sure at that time you could actually do that because they didn't have lights on the drones, even though you can only go up to 400 feet. And it was a drone in the lawn, and there's a big drone like that. The only thing I didn't have the controller, and we've had that in our upstairs in my war room for about 10 years now, just sitting there. So that even they landed, and then they came in and landed on our property.
Oh,
They're
wow.
probably still looking for it. They probably were looking for it for quite a while after that. They had some pretty cool shots of it. But and speaking of drones, we have recently had the whole 110 acres lidar. In the new lidar now, and the drones can see down to a centimeter, like the handheld lidar that Tom did 5 years ago. So that has come a long ways in 5 years because Tom told me his lidar, he can walk into the chambers. It's a $50,000 unit. The computer software is extremely expensive. The software is made in Montreal. The hardware is made in Florida. And then he bought a supercomputer. It took him 600 hours just to do 16 acres. But this other gentleman visited with his girlfriend, and he lives in New Hampshire. He works at a place in Salem, and it's a branch of the same company from Maine to Florida. And they do a lot of construction sites. So they use ground penetration radar. They use LiDAR. And he had a $90,000 drone with a high definition camera plus a super high definition camera that he put on it. And then the LiDAR, he said this LiDAR can see down to about a centimeter. And he went up there and he changed cameras and all of that. And he actually had a smaller drone too. He used just to test it initially, just to go up there. He had it all programmed, and he mapped the entire almost 110 acres of all the walls, the serpent walls, the windows. We're just waiting for that. We got the two files on the camera part of it, the visual spectrum camera stuff, and that was pretty amazing. I mean, that was really great. He did it with all the leaves off the tree before the snow came. I think he did it in early December. But we're waiting for the LiDAR because that's going to take a while. Like Tom said, it takes a long time to do all the data processing or whatever you have to do. And when we get that, I want to put that in my new book too. And I
Yeah.
want to show, if we can, all 34 windows. These are what we call spirit windows. These are found in North Stonington. They're found in the Berkshires. Some of these are associated with serpent walls. They're just beautiful windows with sill, a lintel, nice side pieces, and it's all stone. And there are various sizes, maybe a couple feet across and a foot high, a little bit small, a little bit bigger. Some are we have one that has four in a row adjacent to each other. That one, the biggest one, has actually a stone slab that actually serves the stone shutter. It stood up right next to it.
Oh, wow.
And we have another one that is a four window, but the two above and two below in a wall. So there's two with four windows adjacent to each other, a different arrangement. Then we have several with two windows together, like one above the other, next to each other, kind of. But we found four of them have cobbles. Cobbles are little stones you can hold in your hand, maybe like a softball size, maybe a grapefruit size. And they're just placed inside the windows, almost like little offerings. And we have four like that. And those are hard to see because the stones are in there blocking the light going through the window. And I've gone by one right next to it with my snowmobile and ATV. It's right to my right, maybe about 150 feet where I'm sitting. And I've been going by there for years. I only noticed it the fall of 2023. And that's in my new book too. And I'm like, I never saw that. And I've been riding by it for years because the little cobbles block the sunlight coming through it. And it's the most beautiful little window. Some people call them soul holes. They use that term in England because they have the same thing in Dartmoor, some of the megalithic walls. But they're in the Berkshires and North Stonington again. The guy that wrote the book had 25 categories of structures, and one of them was serpents, and another one was windows. And the windows are in Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. They're up in Vermont too. I don't know how far west they go. The serpents go to the west coast out to Weed, but I'm not sure how far the windows go. But again, we have 34 of them at our site, and they're in the various stone walls. Not in the main site has windows in the chambers. That's a little different, but they're similar kind of. But these are in the stone walls themselves, near the top of the wall, midway down near the bottom. They're not for drainage, not culverts or anything like that. They're not for bunny rabbits to run through, to my best knowledge,
Right, right, right.
or squirrels.
They're not
But
they're not for
I think
farmers.
they're spiritual.
They're
Yeah,
not
I think they're
not
not.
for farmers to hand the milk through the windows to be,
Right, yeah, something practical, and yeah, they're not like that at all, and they're so. And one of them was found the day that the ancient aliens came up and filmed us, and they actually showed a couple of structures in the Hudson Valley, and they had the celebrities of there, Hugh Newman from England, who's been to our site, David Childress, who's on that show. They did it down there. They didn't, but he's been all of them. Andrew Collins that does Gobekli Tepe. He's been to our site. I've done a couple of radio shows with Andrew. So, but then they went to Connecticut, to Gunji and they filmed that. Then they came up to our site, and as the guy came in, he had a drone. My assistant archaeologist, Pete, he went up with me, and we brought him up to the site, showed him around, did his bearings, and then he got all his equipment set up, both just handheld cameras and on tripods, and then he had his drone. We gave him permission to use his drone, and then we just said, "We'll set you free. If you have any questions, you can call the main building. We'll come back up." He went up and just did B-roll for the day. And we knew that he was probably finishing up. We heard the drone and all that for a while. And then we went up there, and he was packing up. We walked him back, and about halfway between the watch house that I mentioned and the visitor center, not too far from where Daryl Jameson did his interview for that show for the Holton Club. In fact, he did it right in front of that window. That Pete looks down and goes, "There's another window. It's like the first one you found, the same shape lintel, but it has like little slabs in it, like Venetian blinds that we used to shutters right in it. And
Wow.
it's still like that. We went and touched all the Venetian blinds. We did not pull them out because we try not to disturb anything, but they were all loose inside, just as the cobbles. I'll touch them with my finger without really disturbing them. We
Yeah.
make sure they're not supporting the roof. In that case, all you have is rocks in a wall, with a flat slab
Yeah.
being supported by. It's not the case. These are just all loose inside of it. They can be removed. And so this Venetian blind one was found right when the guy and in fact, he had his camera out. He could have filmed it, and it would have been spontaneous. That would have been, because we were like, really acting real. We weren't acting. We're like, "Oh my God, look at that.
Yeah.
There's another one. I've been going by that one. That was the original path to the site in the
Yeah.
50s, 60s, and through the 90s. We had a different route to go up to, the nature trail, and that's a different route. But up to about 1997, that was the main way up there. And we still let people walk that way too, if they want to, a shortcut. They have a hard time walking with it. That's the way to go. And they've been walking by there, never noticed it. They hide in plain sight. So those are all since 2016, a lot of that. In the trapezoid shape, that's another big thing. We're finding the floor plans of the chambers. Chamber in ruins where the roof slab fallen in is not rectangular. It's trapezoid. The floor plan is. The patty chamber, which is not built by the patty family, it's just in the area of the house the wooden house, that's trapezoidal. Tom's LiDAR showed both of these to be trapezoids. And then we got a little alcove next to the sacrificial table, and that is trapezoid. But the
Oh,
first
wow.
trapezoid shape I found was actually the groove on the table. When Dave Stewart Smith was there talking in 2016 before he passed, he was doing a 11-minute video that your audience can watch on our website. It's 11 minutes. We show it in the theater too in our visitor center. And he was talking about the table, the groove on it being rectangular and all that. And that's what we've always said, a rectangular groove, going back to Goodwin and probably before that. And I said, the camera stopped and you're going to do another take. And I said, Dave, well, the camera's off. Hey, do you measure that from, the center of the groove to the center? He goes, yeah, that center of the groove, center of the groove. I said, okay. Next day I went up because something bothered me about the rectangular he said it's like 4 by 6 feet. So I went up and I measured it, and it's actually 9 inches narrower at the top than the bottom. And it's a trapezoid. It's the first one I found. That was in 2016. And then Tom's LiDAR in 2020, we found the three I mentioned, plus the whole courtyard where Patty's wooden house sat was a trapezoid. And the sill plates are so big that the walls can accept a slightly not rectangular house, if you will. It
Right.
sits on it. And the house today was brought down the hill back in the 1860s. And it's sitting across from our entrance to our parking lot today. But any event, the trapezoid shape's new to us since 2016 too.
Wow.
And this chamber is like down the road, the Plastow, New Hampshire chamber. It's just one of many. And we went in there and measured it a year ago. We had a film crew up actually from Kansas City. The guy does films for Prime and for Showtime. He does movies, Hallmark movies, and he's interested. He's been up twice. He's going to do an ancient sites doc around the world, I think. But his primary thing is commercial films. But he wants to do this documentary and then try to sell that on these ancient sites. So we were there and we went into the chamber and we measured it. The guy was one of his friends from New England. Actually, was measuring it in the center. So why don't you try both ends to see if they're, what shape it? He did. It was trapezoid. I'm like, And I've been in that chamber in the '60s. I don't know, and the
Right.
whole side. So a lot of things are coming out. Like we're discovering, I would say, since 2016 and my retirement was I kind of missed flying a lot. I did it for 42 years, but I'll tell you what, this with this stuff going on, I was never a dull moment. It was kind of
Well, no, I mean,
exciting.
110 acres, I'm sure you're gonna be busy for a long time. There's gonna be more and more stuff going up. So what,
Yeah,
before I let you go,
yeah.
so, like, what are your hours and when can people go there? And like, you know, um, you know, is there a time limit people can be there? Is there, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's good. Yeah, we do have we're open 7 days a week. We're open all year round except for Thanksgiving and Christmas. We're open right now from 9 to 5. Last year missions at 4. That's because it takes at least an hour to go through the short walk. There's a short trail, and then there's a longer one. So you might want to give yourself more than an hour. But if people come in at 4, they can still go up and see the site. On days like the solstices, we stay open for sunrise, especially in the summer when the sun comes up so early in the morning. We're open for that. We stay all the way open till like I think it's 8:20 or 24 when the sun sets. We'll stay open to 9 that night. And sometimes people don't want to leave. They want to talk and we're there to 10. But that's on our website. So we're open every day of the year except for those Christmas, Thanksgiving, 9 to 5, and all sorts of weather, except if we have a blizzard. 2 weeks ago, we had a pretty bad storm here, and the roads were jammed. So I went over and fed our alpacas that day. I took the snowmobile over twice, checked up on the place. We didn't even bother plowing the parking lot; it was so bad, and nobody's going to come anyway. The roads are closed almost, and that was terrible. But other than that, we're open all the time, and yeah, so people should be there during those hours. We have drumming circles coming up. We have a couple of different other events on our calendar. If they go to our Stonehenge-USA.com, they can see some of the events coming up. They can play that 11-minute video that's on there. It's free. And there's also a free app download. If you
USA.
download the app, you can do a complete virtual tour of our site. It will talk to you. It has a picture of the feature you're looking at, and it has text. So if you use it on the tour, it's kind of nice because as you're walking, you take your phone, you look and say, oh, that's the watch house, and it tells you about it. It has a text. So that's all free. So people that can't come ever or maybe can't come for a while, live on the other side of the world, can actually go to a website and do a complete free virtual tour
Oh,
that they
that's
would see.
cool.
That's kind of neat. Yeah, we did that for about 6 years now. And I had a lady from Stonehenge come up about 3 months ago, and she went up. My wife waited on her. When she came back down, I waited on her because she bought one of my books. And I said, "Oh, where are you from?" I knew she had an English accent. She goes, "Oh, I'm from England." She goes, "As a matter of fact," she goes, "I work in administration at Stonehenge." And I'm like, "You do?" And so I've heard from her since then. She went back and she's been telling people about our site over there. And she goes, the next time you come over, we haven't been there since the 90s. You've been there probably 5 times during the 80s and 90s. She goes, next time you come back, look me up. I'm usually up at the visitor center. And sometimes I go out at the site itself. She goes, but look me up and we'll get you into the pod. Because I've never been inside. There's like a rope around it. You can pay extra, or you got to be there a certain day, like the summer solstice, when 5,000 people show up. Who the heck wants to be there? And I'd love to. I mean, maybe I would. I don't know, but it's crazy. You're not going to be able to see much with all those people there on the summer solstice. It actually makes the national news over here. You'll see film. Oh, there's Stonehenge today on the longest day of the year. Look at all the people. It's pretty cool. But I like to go in there and walk
Cool.
around the stones. That'd be kind of neat. And maybe
Yeah,
she'll guide me around. That would be cool. I got her
that's
right in my
awesome.
wallet. I have her name and everything right there. I never took it out of my wallet. It's right there.
And for you, tell everybody your books. You say you have two books, or you're working on it.
Yeah, I have one of them here. The first one came out in 2018. It's a souvenir book. It has text and has a lot of photographs. And I don't know if I can hold this up. They can see it. This came out 1 year ago on the Equinox. Scott Walters was up. I had mentioned him before. He was up for a special all-day event at our place. And my book came out like a couple of days before that because he has several books out. So he was helping to, when I was in doing my lecture, he was out there selling some of my books. It was kind of cool. But my next one will be coming out all about the walls, windows, the turn, twist, and bends of the walls, the zigzag walls, the D-shaped walls, which are in Colorado, along with the serpents. And in that book, I'm up to chapter 7 and almost finished the rough draft. We're going to put a lot of photographs. My son will do the introduction, and my master, well, he's a master stonemason actually, and he's our assistant archaeologist. Pete will do the forward in the book, and I'll write the preface. And it'll be about the same size. The other books the same dimensions, a little bit thinner than this. But my new book will be almost exactly the same as this book here as far as size and the amount of pages and everything. I think summer solstice, I think we're going to try to shoot for.
Awesome. Well, Dennis, this has been fantastic. Um,
Thank you.
I literally want to come there now. Now it's like on my bucket list now. Um,
Oh, excellent.
sounds like such a fantastic, magical place. And I say magical, I mean magical meaning there just seems like there's just so like it seems like one of those places where if I were to walk on it, I would just I'm not a psychic medium or anything like that, or I'm not a I'm not empathic, but it seems like it'd be one of those places where once you start walking on, you could just feel something different in the air. You can just feel that there's a gravitational pull or there's some sort of a something happening there within the universe and Stonehenge of USA. It just talking to you sounds like that vibe. And I would love to be able to visit one day.
Well,
um
that's wonderful. That you see it a lot with a lot of people that have either psychic or just people have sensitivity about the energy, positive energy, and there are ley lines all the way to Stonehenge at summer solstice sunrise. My son found in 2012 from the platform to the stone. Took Google Earth right across goes right through the center of Stonehenge. And I have a friend from Avery right down the street. She's going to be here in May 17th and 18th doing a 2-day workshop. Before that, she'll be in Egypt leading a tour. Her name is Maria Wheatley. She's doing a 2-day event. It's on Facebook, but she does dowsing, but she's also an archaeologist. She lives right at Avery, one of the biggest megalithic sites, 15 miles from Stonehenge. But she does Sedona, Arizona, the big,
yeah.
the spiritual stuff there. She just did Malta, and again, she's been in Egypt last year. She's just going to be in Egypt on May Day. She was supposed to do our site, but she had to switch the thing around. She goes, I can't get my tour changed, so I'm going to have to be in Egypt. I said, you poor thing, on May Day. Right. Oh, I feel so bad for you because I haven't been to Egypt yet. We've been as far as Rhodes, and Malta and stuff. But she's going to come all the way across over here to do a 2-day workshop and hopefully spend a few days with me before that. And but she's big into vortices, earth energies, ley lines, and so much more than I can describe. But I'm going to show her the windows too, and that'll be part of. She's got a tour. She already has enough people. She hopes a few more join, but she's kind of pleased with the amount of people she has so far. Some are coming from out west to be on her tour, across country, and they've been sending us emails. Where can we stay? Where should we eat? So that's really nice. And I've given her all that information too. So that'll be May 17th and 18th. She'll be doing the 2-day workshop. And then she'll be off to, I don't know, she was doing a thing in LA, but she does lectures, tours, podcasts like you're doing. And a lot of it's kind of earth energy kind of thing, more
Oh,
metaphysical, I think. But she's an archaeologist too, so there's a little balance there of stuff she does,
yeah, that's awesome.
So that'll
Dennis,
be pretty cool. Yeah, yeah.
this has been an amazing show. Thank you so much knowledge and so much. I got to give a little shout out. I want to tell you, I don't know if he's still on, but Ron Murphy, whom I love so much. I don't know if you know him. Um, he said, I have been there. It is so incredibly eerie. Definitely
Oh,
something happened there. Um,
wow.
and we also had a Jing. She's actually from Indonesia. So just so you know, we were being watched in Indonesia
Oh,
this
wow.
evening.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Really cool. Oh, I
So
hope you enjoyed
hopefully
it.
you
Yeah,
spread the
I
word.
mean, I know they have things on that side of the world that are just amazing that end up on TV or in books over here. Pretty amazing stuff. But that's
Sure.
thank you all for listening. For
Oh
everybody,
my
all the way
God,
from
thank you so
Indonesia
much
too.
for
Thank you so
coming
much.
on. You were
Oh, yeah.
fantastic. And I would
Oh,
love
thank
to
you.
have you on again at some point. And maybe one day I can make it out there and I can just do a little live show walking around and showing people this
Oh,
wonderful place.
uh,
I mean, that
yeah.
would
Oh,
be,
that'd be fantastic. We love to do that. I've done a couple of those and absolutely love that. I have a
yeah,
guest last week I did, and she wants to come up from New Jersey to do what you just said. So doing it on the site would be a lot of fun. Come
yeah.
up and be my guest. Bring family. I don't know how far away you are, but
I'm in
I
New
would say
Jersey.
oh, that's where she's from. That's where she's from too. She's on the west side of New Jersey. But yeah, the fall is really. I would say the fall is the best, like September into October. The
Yeah.
weather, no mosquitoes, and we're going to start doing nighttime stargazing. We have a new area because of the forestry
Oh,
project.
I
There's a
like
big
that.
open, and so we left a few logs behind. So we got log bench seats for like 100 people. They left some materials behind, and we have a chimney there. And we've done a bunch of events already. We were supposed to do it with Scott Walters last year, an evening thing with Ronnie LeBlanc from Expedition Bigfoot. He's
Hmm.
been to our site. He's
Yeah.
on Travel Channel. Well, he had an emergency in the middle of the night, so that kind of messed that up. But and then the ice storm came that night, so we didn't get a chance to use that. But we did the whole thing in the visitor center. Go out to eat, come back. We're supposed to do a nighttime stargazing with Ronnie. And he's going to do some lore. But his thing, something happened with his family, I think. He couldn't make it, which is sad. He's been to the site. I've done a UFO conference with him in Massachusetts where he introduced me and everything. He's a really nice guy. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, we want to do more stargazing Friday nights like the national parks, and we'll have speakers come in talk about myth, mythology, about the stars, alignments,
That sounds
that kind of thing.
really cool.
And
That
I'll give
sounds
a
like it's
little.
right up my
Yeah,
alley. I would love.
yeah, yeah. You come. Maybe we could do it then. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that would be so
Yeah,
much fun. I
yeah,
love like
yeah.
I meteor showers, anything with the sky, anytime the planets align, anything like that. I am like all about it. I love it. Um,
I think we had about 700 people for the eclipse last year in the spring.
wow. I bet.
So that was
Yeah,
good. That was good. Yeah.
that's awesome. Well, Dennis, thank you so much. I'm gonna let you go. Believe it or not, it's been almost 2 hours.
It's 10:30 already. Wow, I
Yeah,
gotta get to bed.
it's funny that before we came on, I was like,
Yeah,
the show's an hour. He said, "Oh, that's good, that's perfect,"
yeah,
and here we are. I mean, it's just such good
yeah,
talk that you just don't even realize,
uh,
um,
yeah,
um, you know, how quickly it goes by when there's just so much information, and I love it. I love that it has so much. I love meaty historical places, and and there's a meaning behind all of it,
yeah,
and
yeah.
you're finding all of this out, and it's great, and I love it, and I love what you're doing, and I wish you and your wife nothing but the best with the property
Uh,
and your family. I hope it I hope it's everything and more than anything you've ever
uh,
expected.
well,
Um,
thank you so much. It was a total joy. Yeah, I thought it was only about 9:30 right now, and you're right. I totally enjoyed it. Next time we talk about people that, like the connections to New Jersey, like Ivan Sanderson, he was an amazing guy. He was on TV back in the 50s, all about all these unusual, unbelievable. He had a thing called the Society of Investigation of the Unexplained. He died in 1973. He was on the Gary Moore Show, the first color TV in 1953. He was on the TV show. He was on radio. He was born in Edinburgh. But you talk about UFOs, and he's the guy that had coined the term cryptozoology.
mm,
He's the father. He became a friend of the family. We went to his home in New Jersey in '66 on WOR in New York City in 1970. He took over Barry Faber for a day or two because Barry was on vacation. He went to so he has a lot of cool stuff. But there's other people that were involved with NEAR. One of my dad's best friend, Ed Lennox. He was from New Jersey and he was vice president of Eastern States Archaeological. I think he's still around, and he dug on the Spirit Pond moonstones, which gets on Scott Walter's show. They mentioned it on Oak Island show and all. But anyway, my dad was ahead of that whole project with Ed Lennox was one of the guys. So a lot of New Jersey connections. And if people look, you'll see it's called Weird New Jersey. That
yeah,
book. It's a series, and we've been in New. You can see other chambers down in your state, Weird New Jersey. I'll let you go because I know we got to get off. But there's a lot of stuff with New Jersey too, and I used to go into Newark all the time anyway, flying. So I'm pretty familiar with that part of New Jersey anyway. So.
I'm telling you, you're like an encyclopedia wrapped up in an encyclopedia wrapped up in an encyclopedia. I love it.
Oh, thank you so much. I had a wonderful evening. I love these shows, and you really made it totally enjoyable. And thank the audience too.
Thank you so
And
much.
again, they can check us out, Stonehenge USA, and everything's on there. And I think that virtual tour is pretty cool. They can get an idea what it's
Absolutely.
like.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
absolutely check that out. That's pretty cool.
yeah.
Until next time, Dennis, you have a nice evening. Thank you so much for joining us. You've been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you again. Take care now.
I'll talk to you soon.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Wow, what an amazing guy. I mean, what an amazing and this place it sounds phenomenal. 110 acres and all kinds of stuff all over I mean, what I mean, he was just I love the shows where I don't have when I don't have to talk that much. And my guests just you can tell how much he loves what he's doing and how much he loves where he's at, his property, what he owns. And I love to see that. And everybody, just keep in mind when you're going there, pay to do your thing, because the money goes back into the property to preserve it, for the research of it. The research is the biggest thing. If you didn't hear them, how much it costs to research the stuff and send stuff out for sampling and this and that. So, every dime helps a place out. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. I know the show went a little long tonight, but I mean, I wish we could have kept on talking. He was so great. And I want to thank everybody for being here and listening. Um, until next time, my faithful little brewskis. um, sweet dreams. And I will see you guys next week. Good night. Love you guys.